Important update about YouTube playlists. Hey everyone. We've received many messages asking why our YouTube playlists aren't showing up. Do we create YouTube playlists? Yes, we absolutely do. So why can't you see them? Honestly, we're not sure. We've been in contact with YouTube support for several months now, but we still haven't received a clear answer or solution. After much discussion, our team has decided to take matters into our own hands. We believe the issue might be related to the number of playlists we've created on a single channel, possibly too many. Our solution? We're launching 2 additional YouTube channels, giving us a total of 3. This way, we can organize our audiobooks better and avoid the playlist visibility issue in the future. This change only affects our YouTube audience. If you're a patron supporter, you can still access all our audiobooks by visiting the collection menu on Patreon. Thanks so much for your time and continued support. Happy listening. Built a new ship for them, aptly named the Dark Maru 2. Free of charge. Unable to return to Water 7 and now a wanted man by the world government, Tom accepted Tiger's suggestion and joined the Sun Pirates as their shipwright. The Sun Pirates were already a crew made up of individuals wanted by the world government, and all were fishmen, so Tom's addition to the crew felt perfectly natural and was welcomed without any hesitation. However, when Iceberg and Frankie expressed their desire to join the Sun Pirates alongside their mentor, they were met with firm opposition from both the Sun Pirates and Tom himself. The Sun Pirates had 2 main reasons for rejecting the boys. First, Iceberg and Frankie were human, and the Fishman crew was not keen on the idea of living closely with humans. Second, Arlong and the others felt that Iceberg and Frankie were too weak and would only drag down the overall strength of the crew. They had already turned away most of the fishmen from Fishman District who wanted to join, so there was no reason to allow 2 human kids with insufficient strength to join them. Tom's refusal was much simpler. He didn't want his 2 disciples to become pirates. He wished for them to continue their lives as skilled shipwrights. Tom himself had no choice but to join the Sun Pirates, as his bounty left him with no means to protect himself. However, Iceberg and Frankie were not wanted criminals and could still live normal lives. For these reasons, Iceberg and Frankie were left behind at the Sabati Archipelago, where they started their own shipyard. Sabati Archipelago, being the gateway to the New World, had a thriving shipbuilding industry, as well as a robust coating business. After their new ship, the Dark Maru 2, was coated, Wood and his crew successfully made their way to Fishman Island and officially entered the New World. Sailing down to Fishman Island, 10,000 meters beneath the surface, is a journey fraught with peril. Beyond the skill of the coating artisans, many other factors can turn the voyage deadly. For instance, the risk of a seeking attack or the sudden depletion of oxygen within the bubble could spell disaster. Should the protective bubble surrounding the ship burst while descending into the depths, even the strongest of warriors would have no choice but to meet their end in the sea. The immense pressure of the deep ocean could easily crush a regular human's internal organs, and without the ability to breathe underwater, no amount of strength could save them. Entering the New World requires a certain level of courage and strength, and this initial passage to Fishman Island serves as a test for these pirates. The high mortality rate on the way to Fishman Island has driven many aspiring New World pirates to risk the route past Marine headquarters instead. At least with the Marines, they have a fighting chance, whereas in the deep sea, the odds are almost entirely against them. Of course, while the 2 routes to the New World might be perilous for others, they pose no significant challenge for Wood and his crew. If they had chosen to pass by Marine headquarters, Wood could have simply informed Sengoku in advance, ensuring that no serious efforts would be made to stop them. Just a few token warships giving chase. As for the route to Fishman Island, with the Sun Pirates guiding them, what danger could possibly arise? Tiger and his crew could practically navigate the route to Fishman Island with their eyes closed. Even when Sea Kings attacked along the way, Wood and his crew didn't need to lift a finger. Tiger's crew handled them effortlessly. Upon arriving at Fishman Island, Wood and his companions were treated to the full experience of what it meant to be idols. Tiger and the Sun Pirates might have been wanted criminals in the outside world, but on Fishman Island, they were nothing short of heroes. As their massive bubble entered Fishman Island, a large crowd of Fishman Island residents, already informed of their arrival, gathered at the square, waving banners to welcome Tiger and his crew. After their daring raid on Mary Joyce, Tiger and his crew had pulled off yet another grand feat, this time in defense of their fellow fishmen. To the world government, Tiger was a dangerous criminal, but to the inhabitants of Fishman Island, he was a true hero. Even King Neptune of Fishman Island did not stop his people from welcoming and idolizing Tiger and his crew. In fact, he seemed to support their actions. As long as the world government's formalities were observed, nothing else mattered to Fishman Island. Situated 10,000 meters below the surface, deep within the ocean, it was practically a no-go zone for humans. If not for the fear of the world governments and Marine's top fighters, King Neptune would have had little reason to care about anyone's opinion. Since Wood and his crew had played a heroic supporting role in the events at NI's lobby, they too were warmly welcomed by the residents of Fishman Island. During this time, Wood also met the famed Queen Atoheim. To be precise, it was Queen Atoheim who requested to meet with Wood once he arrived on the island. Queen Atoheim had dedicated her life to the dream that one day, fishmen and merfolk could live in harmony with humans. Unfortunately, despite her high status, her ideals did not have many supporters on Fishman Island. Over the years, Queen Atoheim had never encountered a human who shared her vision. Until Tiger told her about Wood. The meeting was set in the Forest of the Sea, a place Queen Atoheim often visited. This forest, home to the poneglyph that is said to contain information about the legendary Poseidon, was the location she had chosen to meet Wood. Knowing what he did about Poseidon, Wood didn't bring Robin along for this meeting. He decided to come alone. Upon arriving at the Forest of the Sea, Wood found both Tiger and Queen Atoheim eagerly awaiting his arrival. Both looked pleased to see him. Tiger immediately apologized to Wood, admitting that he had broken his promise to keep Wood's identity a secret. He had informed Queen Atoheim about Wood's alter ego, the fishman swordsman Yasuo, and had even told her about their conversation on the deserted island. "Please don't worry about it, Tiger," Wood responded. "If it's Queen Atoheim, I don't mind. I trust her to keep my secret." Chapter 199, A Mermaid. Now I'm even more excited. Queen Atoheim, a member of the mermaid race and a goldfish mermaid at that, had long, wavy golden hair, large blue eyes, and an orange crown-shaped hair clip that held her hair back. She wore a long robe with a pattern resembling orange fish scales, which grew denser around the cuffs and tail. Although she was the mother of Princess Shirahoshi, renowned as the most beautiful woman in the world, Queen Atoheim herself wasn't exactly breathtakingly stunning. However, beyond her appearance, Atoheim had a unique aura of warmth and trustworthiness. Even though this was their first meeting, Wood found himself instinctively feeling that this woman before him was someone he could trust and admire. "Please forgive Captain Tiger's breach of etiquette. He knew of my long-standing wish," Atoheim began, her tone sincere. "Like me, Captain Tiger has always believed that merfolk, fishmen, and humans could coexist peacefully. But for so many years, neither the merfolk I represent nor the fishmen Tiger represents have ever encountered a human who shares our dream. Until you, Sir Wood. Humans, fishmen, and merfolk share the same blood," she continued, her voice trembling with emotion. "Perhaps, many years ago, we even had the same ancestors. Sir Wood, you cannot imagine how thrilled I was when Captain Tiger relayed your words to me. I have the gift of observation hockey, allowing me to hear the voices in people's hearts and to speak to them through my speeches. Yet, despite all the speeches I've given, it was only when I heard your words that I was moved to tears." As Queen Atoheim spoke, tears began to well up in her large eyes, and even a single nostril started to run, giving her a rather unsightly appearance. Wood couldn't help but wonder if this person was truly the Queen of Fishman Island. "I really am the Queen of Fishman Island, you know," Atoheim said, noticing Wood's dubious expression. She quickly wiped her nose with her sleeve while explaining. "I'm just so moved by this moment that I couldn't help myself." What shocked Wood even more was that Atoheim had responded to his thoughts. Thoughts he hadn't even voiced aloud. "I mentioned earlier, didn't I?" Atoheim smiled gently. "My observation hockey allows me to hear the voices in people's hearts, but only if they open up to me or if we share mutual understanding. Captain Tiger didn't betray your secret. It's just that I could hear his inner thoughts. I'm so glad, Sir Wood," she continued, her tears drying. "At first, I had some doubts. Could there really be a human like you, as Captain Tiger described? But now I've confirmed it. You really are the person he said you were. Someone who harbors no prejudice against merfolk or fishmen. You even trust me, someone you've just met. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to hear your thoughts." Upon hearing that her ability to read minds had such limitations and that she couldn't hear his thoughts if he chose to close his heart, Wood let out a deep sigh of relief. Even though he had no particular bias against Queen Atoheim, being around someone who could hear your thoughts at will was certainly unnerving. Wood even found himself feeling a bit sorry for King Neptune. With a wife who could read minds, how could Neptune ever hope to keep any secrets? The idea of hiding a stash of gold or maintaining a mistress somewhere was out of the question. As for the lack of prejudice that Atoheim sensed in Wood, that was true enough. After all, as a man who had been reincarnated into this world, his worldview was bound to differ from the natives of this world. Different species, different minds? Oh, come on, that's nonsense. Wood thought, stifling a laugh. In my previous life, there were people who were so desensitized that they couldn't even get excited by normal humans anymore. Mermaids? They were just another form of well, let's just say, They were no different from any other non-human beauties in his eyes. Ahem, perhaps that's a bit off topic. Anyway, to Wood, there was really no significant difference between merfolk and fishmen. After years of playing games and reading countless manga and novels, Wood had long categorized any humanoid species as part of the broader human classification. Seeing how excited Atoheim was to finally meet someone like him, she suggested they celebrate their newfound kinship with a drink. Although Wood didn't know much about Queen Atoheim, her unique observation hockey intrigued him, so he agreed to join her. He didn't notice Captain Tiger frantically shaking his head in the background. "Damn it!" Atoheim suddenly exclaimed, her voice slurred as she waved her arms around drunkenly. "Why don't those people support me? I'm working so hard for peace between our races, and they all just ignore me. And Neptune, that fool. He always says he supports me, but where's the action? He's the king of Fishman Island. Couldn't he just pass a law and make everyone follow my lead?" Wood could only stare in astonishment at the sight before him. Was this really the Queen of Fishman Island? This didn't match anything he'd heard about her. Wasn't Queen Atoheim supposed to be a passionate, kind-hearted, and gentle soul? But the woman before him, ranting like a madwoman, was nothing like the image he had in his mind. Could this be an imposter? Queen Atoheim always gets like this when she's had too much to drink. Tiger explained with a resigned sigh. She vents all her frustrations after a few drinks. That's why I was trying to warn you earlier not to drink with her. But if I'm not mistaken, she's only had one drink. Wood pointed out, completely baffled. How could someone with such a poor tolerance for alcohol even dare to invite others to drink? Despite her pitiful tolerance, Atoheim continued to rant, pounding the table with her hands as she vented her frustrations. The more she spoke, the more she slammed the table in her fit of drunken rage. But what left Wood completely speechless was that Queen Atoheim, in her drunken fervor, managed to fracture her own hand while hitting the table. Queen Atoheim is in very poor health. Tiger continued his explanation. Even slapping someone could cause her to fracture her bones. As he watched the scene unfold, Wood could only sit there, utterly speechless, as Tiger continued to educate him on Atoheim's frailties. Apparently, Atoheim's delicate condition was so severe that not only could she not slap others without injury, but she could even break her own bones in the process. Chapter 200, Wood's proposal to Queen Atoheim. As Wood watched Queen Atoheim tear up again from the pain of her broken arm, he realized that his previous perception of her had been completely shattered. Standing before him, the 224 centimeters tall Queen Atoheim had once seemed like a strong, authoritative figure in his mind. But now, she appeared more like an overgrown child who had never really matured. This raised an interesting question: if Queen Atoheim's body was so fragile, how did she ever manage to handle Neptune's? Well, let's not get too sidetracked. In any case, after the initial shock, Wood and Tiger found themselves acting as emotional sponges for Queen Atoheim, who spent a good deal of time venting her frustrations to them. It wasn't until the effects of the alcohol began to wear off that Atoheim finally brought up the serious matter at hand. She pulled out a document, which was actually a petition signed by the residents of Fishman Island, supporting the idea of relocating to the surface. The document was filled with signatures, the result of Atoheim's relentless efforts in her public speeches. With the petition in hand, Atoheim explained her plan to Wood and Tiger. She intended to present this appeal at the upcoming reverie, hoping to secure the right for the inhabitants of Fishman Island to live on land. However, both Wood and Tiger simply shook their heads in silence at her proposal. This immediate rejection caused Atoheim's enthusiasm to deflate, leaving her looking as dejected as a withered flower. While your idea is commendable, Queen Atoheim, the notion of petitioning at the reverie is completely impractical. Wood began. The fate of whether fishmen can live on land doesn't rest in the hands of ordinary humans. The truth is controlled by those with power. Right now, the ones holding that power are the world government, and the celestial dragons, who pull the strings behind them, view merfolk and fishmen as nothing more than playthings. Do you really believe they would ever agree to peaceful coexistence? Wood asked pointedly. Even if, by some miracle, your proposal was accepted at the reverie, what would you do if those hopeful fishmen who moved to the surface were captured and sold into slavery? Tiger nodded in agreement. The hatred between humans and fishmen runs deep. Even within the Sun Pirates, that animosity is ever present. You can't erase that hatred with a few speeches. It will take generations, starting with the younger ones, who haven't been scarred by that mutual animosity. Hearing these words, Queen Atoheim slumped into her seat, defeated. She had thought her plan was a good one, but now she saw how many flaws it had. There is another way to make humans fully accept fishmen. Wood continued. The world government holds all the power now, and they are unfriendly to fishmen. So, the solution is simple. Replace the ones in power with someone who is. You're talking about the Revolutionary Army, aren't you? Tiger asked, recalling previous conversations with Wood. Do you really think they would accept fishmen? As far as we know, the Revolutionary Army is the only force that dares to challenge the world government directly. Wood replied. And they already have fishmen among their ranks. You won't find that in the Navy or the world government. The fishmen could aid the Revolutionary Army in overthrowing the world government, and in return, the Revolutionary Army could help the fishmen achieve their dream of living on land. It's a reasonable deal, and given the current state of the Revolutionary Army, I doubt their leader, Dragon, would refuse such an offer. You could assist the Revolutionary Army in toppling the world government, while Queen Atoheim could focus on educating the next generation. Wood suggested. You could establish a school that teaches both human and fishmen children together. The key is not to segregate them. Let them grow up together, learning side by side. Kids don't carry the same biases as adults. Over time, they'll come to see that fishmen, or humans, aren't as terrifying as they might have been told. With a dual approach, Wood continued. By the time the world government falls, fishmen and merfolk will not only have earned a place on land, but those children who grew up together will carry forward the belief that humans and fishmen can coexist peacefully. Although Wood's plan wasn't without its rough edges, Queen Atoheim was moved by his words. With tears in her eyes, she clasped his hands in gratitude, expressing her thanks repeatedly. Both she and Tiger agreed that Wood's plan had a much higher chance of success than her original idea. Finding humans willing to study alongside fishmen won't be easy at first, Wood warned. But I suggest you start by visiting a place called Birdie Island in the West Blue. The island is mostly inhabited by women and children now, as all the men were killed by the one-eyed pirates. If you go there with sufficient supplies and show them my flag, you might just be able to recruit some students. After spending a few more days on Fishman Island, enjoying VIP treatment, Wood and his crew finally set sail for the New World. Before leaving, Wood reminded Queen Atoheim to be cautious, even if she decided to proceed with his plan of fostering coexistence between human and fishman children. Wood vividly remembered that in the original timeline, Queen Atoheim would eventually be assassinated by a fishman extremist. Even 10 years later, the identity of her killer remained unknown to the people of Fishman Island. But Wood, being a time traveler, knew the truth all too well. Hody Jones, a great white shark fishman from Fishman District, was a staunch advocate of fishman's supremacy. Once a follower of Arlong, Hody had since devolved into nothing more than a dangerous zealot. Not all fishmen wanted peaceful coexistence with humans. In the original story, after Tiger's death, Queen Atoheim was assassinated, further deepening the rift between humans and fishmen. But now, with Wood's intervention, Tiger was still alive, and with his warning, there was a good chance that Queen Atoheim would be safe from Hody Jones's schemes. If both Tiger and Queen Atoheim survived, who knows? Perhaps when Luffy and his crew arrived on Fishman Island years later, they might find a place transformed by peace rather than conflict. Chapter 201, Wood, who says pirates can't sell fish. Of course, whether the fishmen would be able to coexist peacefully with humans 10 years from now, Wood couldn't say. After all, even though he was a time traveler, he couldn't foresee a future that had already been altered. He had said everything he could and done everything he could. The fishmen had helped him raid Anai's lobby, and in return, he had indirectly saved Queen Atoheim's life. That was the extent of what he could offer. Now, on the second half of the Grand Line, the route known as the New World, a medium-sized two-masted pirate ship was sailing smoothly on the calm seas. These royals from Fishman Island sure are stingy. Where's the gratitude they talked about? Why didn't they give us something useful instead of this pile of junk? Wood grumbled. Because he had gotten along so well with the residents of Fishman Island and had helped them considerably, the Ryugu Kingdom had showered them with farewell gifts as they departed. Having heard rumors about the vast wealth of Ryugu Palace, Wood had been grinning ear to ear when he heard they were preparing gifts for him. But when Queen Atoheim ordered her soldiers to load the gifts onto Wood's ship, his smile quickly froze on his face. The supposedly lavish gifts from the wealthy Ryugu Palace weren't the gold and jewels he had imagined. Instead, they were met with a boatload of various seafood. According to Queen Atoheim, these were specialties of Fishman Island, including some ingredients that were the stuff of a chef's dreams. Staring at the ship's hold, packed to the brim with seafood, Wood wore a deadpan expression. The so-called specialties were far from what he had envisioned. This was Fishman Island, after all, and the gifts were from the royal family. Shouldn't the specialties have been something more along the lines of fist-sized pearls? Even if they didn't have any treasure, sending him a couple of beautiful mermaids as attendants would have been a nice gesture. But a boatload of seafood? What were they supposed to do with that? Sure, some of it might be dream ingredients. But so what? It wasn't like they had a top-tier chef on board. In fact, the best cooks on the ship were Wood and Robin, and their culinary skills were only good enough to make sure the food was properly cooked. As for the others, like Ruth, their cooking often resulted in half-raw dishes that were barely recognizable as food. Originally, I wanted to give you some treasure as a token of gratitude, Queen Atoheim had said with a smile. But Tiger mentioned that you're not ordinary pirates, and you might not care much for treasures. After careful consideration, I decided these gifts would be more appropriate. The memory of Queen Atoheim's words made Wood want to strangle Tiger. So it was all Tiger's fault that the Queen's gift had been so underwhelming. Wood had wanted to tell Queen Atoheim that they were just ordinary, lowly pirates with no lofty ideals about treating gold as dirt. But the image he had built up was too grand, and when he tried to say as much, Queen Atoheim just thought he was joking. "Captain, where are we heading next?" Ruth asked. After entering the new world, their log posts now pointed to 3 different islands, and they could choose their next destination from these options. "We're heading to the most populated and prosperous island among these 3. We need to sell off this seafood as quickly as possible before it spoils," Wood replied. Queen Atoheim had given them quite a few specialties, but seafood didn't keep for long. If they didn't sell it quickly, it would just go to waste. "Are we really going to sell seafood?" "But we're pirates, not fishermen," Ruth said, stunned. Ever since he had joined Wood's crew, Ruth felt like his life had gone from bad to worse. Back when he was in the Navy, he had been a minor figure, but at least he was a Navy lieutenant. After joining Wood, he became a pirate, and recently, they had barely managed to scrape by. Now, things had gotten even worse. Their esteemed pirate crew was about to start selling seafood just to make ends meet. "Who says pirates can't sell seafood? If we don't sell it, are you going to feed us?" Queen Atoheim said some of this seafood is considered dream ingredients, and leaving it to spoil on our ship would be a waste. "Why not sell it for some Baileys?" Wood retorted. If he had any other options, Wood wouldn't be selling seafood, but their crew was running out of funds. If they didn't find some way to make money soon, they wouldn't even be able to afford to keep sailing. They'd likely starve to death in the new world. They had once had a few million Baileys in their coffers, but all that money had been left on the original Dark Maru, which had been confiscated by the world government after their raid on Anai's lobby. Knowing Spandam, there was no way he would have left that money untouched. Even if Spandam hadn't taken it, the money had likely been lost when the world government bombarded their ship, sending the Dark Maru and everything on it to the bottom of the sea. It was only thanks to Tom's generosity in building them the Dark Maru 2 free of charge that they even had a ship to sail. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to set sail at all. Ever since they had left Fishman Island, their diet had consisted almost entirely of seafood, and now they couldn't even open their mouths without the overwhelming taste of fish. Wood decided it was time to find a market to offload the seafood and improve their situation. As it turned out, pirates could indeed sell seafood. Despite Ruth's initial reluctance, once they docked at a bustling island and started selling at the local market, the sheer amount of money they made completely changed his attitude. Wood, a renowned swordsman, had turned into a fishmonger, while Robin, a historian, had become the cashier. The seafood from Fishman Island, harvested from 10,000 meters deep, was worth far more than they had anticipated. Some of the so-called dream ingredients fetched prices as high as several million Baileys per kilogram. The substantial earnings left Wood and his crew with mixed feelings. They had wasted nearly half of the seafood from Queen Atoheim's gift, and now they realized just how valuable it had been. If they had known earlier how much the seafood was worth, they would have endured hunger for a few more days rather than waste it. That was money they had thrown away. Their venture into fishmongering proved incredibly successful. By selling just half of the seafood, Wood's crew managed to rake in nearly 200 million Baileys. This also meant that they had practically squandered another 200 million Baileys back on the ship. Ironically, they seemed to have a better future as fishmongers than as pirates. After all, they had scoured the seas for treasure and had barely amassed 100 million Baileys. Now, after selling some seafood, they had made twice that amount in no time. Chapter 202, a new mission appears, but on further thought, it wasn't all that surprising. The world is full of wealthy people, and essentials like food, clothing, and shelter are vital for survival. Many are willing to spend extravagantly to satisfy their desires. Fishman Island is located 10,000 meters below the sea, and getting there with an ordinary ship requires facing enormous risks. So, it's only natural that the island's specialties would fetch high prices. Interestingly, while Wood and his crew were making a killing selling seafood, a clueless pirate crew became envious of their earnings and tried to extort a so-called protection fee. As for what happened to those pirates, the outcome was predictable. These would-be extortionists had no idea that the man they saw as just a regular fishmonger was actually the notorious Wood, a super rookie in the new world with a bounty of 1 billion Baileys. Needless to say, those pirates met an unfortunate end. They probably died without understanding how a pirate worth 1 billion could be so low-key as to sell fish, effectively baiting them into a trap. After Wood's crew took care of the would-be extortionists, Ruth made a surprising discovery: the pirate crew they defeated had 3 bounty heads among them. The combined bounty was a whopping 150 million Baileys, with their captain alone being worth 100 million. It was yet another reminder that the New World was the New World, where even nameless, faceless pirates could carry bounties in the hundreds of millions. Wood sent an unbountied crew member to deliver the heads to a Navy base to claim the reward. Along with the proceeds from selling the seafood, Wood's crew found themselves in the best financial position they'd ever been in, with a total of 350 million Baileys. Given their newfound wealth, which was far beyond what Wood usually carried in his empty pockets, he should have been ecstatic. But the sudden ringing of a den mushi quickly turned his excitement into a scowl. Finding an excuse to slip away from Ruth and the others, who were busy feasting and drinking at the tavern, Wood pulled out the small den mushi with the familiar goat-like beard. That old schemer Sengoku had promised him that they'd only contact him once every few years, that the mission would be mostly up to his discretion, easy, safe, and he'd get paid just for laying low. But now, it was clear that those promises were nothing but empty words. What was that about contacting him once every few years? It had barely been half a year, and he had already lost count of how many times they had reached out to him. And the missions were anything but easy, they were downright dangerous. As for the promised pay? Wood hadn't seen a single Bailey yet. If it hadn't been for Queen Atoheim's seafood gift, they wouldn't have even made it to this island. After mentally preparing himself for the inevitable frustration, Wood finally answered the persistent buru-buru ringing of the den mushi. As soon as he picked up, the den mushi mimicked Sengoku's expression and voice almost perfectly. Wood, I take it you've entered the New World by now. I have an important mission for you. I'm not doing it. I'm done. What happened to the promise you made when you first roped me into this so-called secret mission? You said it would be easy, not too dangerous, and after a few years, I'd get to retire as a branch captain. But what happened? You said you'd only contact me every few years, and yet, first, you had me negotiate with the world government and secretly steal the blueprints of Pluton. Then you had me bombard Anai's lobby. You don't even give me any operational funds, and now you want to send me on another dangerous mission? Forget it. I'm not doing it. Whoever wants to do it can go instead. Before Sengoku could even finish his sentence, the den mushi, perfectly mimicking Wood's enraged expression, cut him off with a torrent of complaints. Honestly, ever since becoming Fleet Admiral, Sengoku hadn't been spoken to this way by anyone, except maybe the Gorosei. But he knew he had indeed handled things poorly in the past, so he simply wiped the spittle from his face without reprimanding Wood. The mission I'm contacting you about this time is precisely about arranging your operational funds. Given your current status as a pirate, it's difficult to send you funds directly from headquarters. So, this mission is meant to introduce you to another colleague. Once you help him complete his task, you'll receive your operational funds from him. The moment Sengoku began to speak, Wood could already smell another trap. Given that their pirate crew had just made a significant sum of money and had finally escaped poverty, Wood was about to refuse without a second thought. But just as he was about to reject Sengoku, his long-dormant system suddenly reacted, triggering a new mission for him. Mission name: Save the Boy in Silence. Mission objective: Assist Trafalgar Law, who is suffering from Amber Lead Syndrome, and obtain the Operation Fruit model, modification human. Ensure that both Corazon and Trafalgar Law survive. Mission reward: 1 opportunity to simulate a life in the Wanji universe. Seeing the mission details pop up in his system, Wood instantly realized which storyline he had stumbled into. Combining this with Sengoku's mention of a colleague, Wood probed further. Fleet Admiral Sengoku, this mission wouldn't have anything to do with the Don Quixote family that's been making waves in the seas and the underworld recently, would it? The silence from the den mushi was telling. Sengoku, obviously caught off guard, was curious how Wood had connected the dots so quickly. Sensing Sengoku's silence, Wood quickly covered up his slip by saying, I've been a pirate for almost a year now. Given my recent fame and my 10 billion berry bounty, I've had quite a few people trying to join forces with me. Some even approached me about doing business in mermaids, knowing my ties to the fishmen. So, I have my own sources of information. The Don Quixote family's activities in the underworld have been hard to miss lately. Considering the timing of your call, it wasn't hard to guess that this mission might involve them. Wood's explanation wasn't perfect, but to Sengoku, it made sense. After the events of Inai's lobby, Wood's connections to the fishmen were practically common knowledge. Given the consistently high prices of mermaids in the underworld, it wasn't surprising that someone would approach Wood with such an offer. Chapter 203, About to clash with the Don Quixote family? What intel did you get from the underworld? Do you know what the Don Quixote family is planning? The fact that Wood had managed to establish connections with the underworld so quickly was something that had caught Sengoku by surprise. He hadn't expected Wood to be this resourceful in such a short amount of time. But because of this, Sengoku was eager to know if Wood had any information that he himself might not be privy to. I haven't been involved with the underworld for long, so all I know is that the clown seems to be planning something big, involving something very valuable. Wood replied. Hearing this, Sengoku sighed in disappointment. Wood knew much less than he had hoped. In fact, Sengoku suspected that Wood had only guessed that this mission involved the Don Quixote family due to his sharp mind. But Sengoku didn't find this surprising. After all, he had only learned so much through a mole within the Don Quixote family. For Wood, who had only recently started mingling with the underworld, to catch wind of anything was already impressive. If Wood had known more than Sengoku, that would have been cause for concern. The mission I want to assign you does indeed involve the Don Quixote family. Sengoku continued. I've received intel that Don Quixote da Flamengo, acting as an intermediary, plans to sell the Operation Fruit model, modification human currently held by the pirate Diaz Barrels to the world government for 5 billion Baileys. And I also know that while da Flamengo is supposed to be the go-between, he's secretly planning to double-cross both parties. He intends to pocket the 5 billion Baileys from the world government and take the Operation Fruit model, modification human for himself. Diaz Barrels was a former Navy officer who had turned pirate. He was also the father of the Red Flag, ex-Drake. After acquiring the Operation Fruit model, modification human by chance, he had planned to sell it to a high-ranking figure in the world government through the dark intermediary, da Flamengo. But upon learning of the legendary powers of the Operation Fruit model, modification human, da Flamengo had his own designs on the fruit. He shared his plan to betray both sides with his trusted family members. Da Flamengo, often labeled as a rogue of the seas and notorious for his despicable actions, was, however, known for his loyalty to his family. Even with such a treacherous scheme in mind, he hadn't kept it from those he trusted. But what da Flamengo likely hadn't anticipated was the presence of a traitor within his own family. His own brother, Don Quixote Rosinante, also known as Corazon, the second in command of the Don Quixote family. Rosinante, secretly a Marine vice admiral with the code name Clover, Marine ID 01746, had lost his status as a celestial dragon and, after being rescued by Sengoku in his youth, had joined the Marines to prevent his brother from causing further chaos. Rosinante had witnessed da Flamengo murder their father, leading him to believe that his brother was a true demon who needed to be stopped to prevent him from plunging the world into turmoil. The true power of the Operation Fruit model, modification human, was the ability to grant immortality through the sacrifice of the user's life. A power so coveted that the world government was willing to pay 5 billion Baileys to acquire it. Sengoku did not disclose this particular detail to Wood. He merely explained that the fruit was worth 5 billion Baileys. Wood's mission was to prevent da Flamengo from succeeding in his double cross. And if possible, he was to destroy the entire Don Quixote family. Recovering the Operation Fruit model, modification human, was ideal, but if that wasn't possible, destroying it was acceptable. As for the 5 billion Baileys from the world government, if Wood could get his hands on it, it could be used as operational funds. In other words, Sengoku wanted to achieve his goals without lifting a finger, with Wood doing all the dirty work. The so-called operational funds were funds Wood would have to obtain himself. But from Sengoku's perspective, he was contributing as well. After all, he was providing Wood with information he might not have otherwise known. The Don Quixote family is currently located on Minion Island, where Diaz Barrels is also based. If you make it there, look for a man named Corazon, one of the Don Quixote family's officers. He is our mole within the family and will assist you in completing your mission. Sengoku's goal was to bring down the Don Quixote family in one fell swoop, but what he didn't realize was that Corazon had his own agenda. Corazon also wanted the Operation Fruit model, modification human. But not for himself. He didn't seek immortality. He wanted to save a boy named Trafalgar Law from the fatal Amber Lead syndrome. Corazon knew that he couldn't face the world government, the Don Quixote family, or Diaz Barrels' pirate crew on his own. If everything went according to da Flamengo's plan, the Don Quixote family would undoubtedly emerge victorious. To save Law by securing the Operation Fruit model, modification human, Corazon needed to throw a wrench into da Flamengo's plans. He needed another powerful force to intervene, giving him the chance to act in the ensuing chaos. Wood weighed his options. He had the blueprints for the ancient weapon, Pluton, and the ability to read the poneglyphs, thanks to Nico Robin. If he could secure 5 billion Baileys as well. But it wasn't just about the money. As a Marine, it was his duty to undertake dangerous missions. Of course, if he could also complete his system's objectives and make some extra cash on the side, that would be ideal. So, after finishing their stint as fishmongers, Wood and his crew left the island and acquired a permanent log post to Minion Island from the black market, setting course for their next destination. Facing off against the Don Quixote family was no small feat. They were far more formidable than the riffraff of Anai's lobby. As such, Wood had no intention of involving Robin or Ruth in this mission. He planned to have them drop him off at Minion Island and then wait for him on a nearby island. Part of the reason was that Ruth and the others simply weren't strong enough to be of any help. Another reason was that Wood's undercover identity as a Marine didn't lend itself to group activities. It wasn't that Wood didn't trust Ruth and the crew, but in a world full of strange devil fruit powers, who knew what could happen if they were hypnotized or something? Chapter 204, I am here to propose a deal. Ruth and the others had no objections to Wood's decision to operate solo this time. After their experience at Anai's lobby, they understood deeply that there was a gap between them and their captain that they could never hope to bridge. Robin had her own expertise and wasn't counted among the combatants of the crew, but as for Ruth and the others, aside from fighting, they had no significant talents to speak of. This realization only further strengthened their resolve to grow stronger. Upon landing on Minion Island, Wood didn't immediately seek out Corazon, his fellow Marine undercover. Instead, he first covertly located the pirate crew led by Diaz Barrels. The Diaz Barrels pirates were a small crew, numbering around 100 at most. From his hidden vantage point, Wood assessed that Diaz Barrels, the captain, had an aura roughly equivalent to a Marine headquarters captain at best. Given such strength, Wood found it either foolish or incredibly bold for Diaz Barrels to attempt to broker a deal with Doflamingo and the world government, especially for the astronomical sum of 5 billion Baileys. Did Diaz Barrels truly believe he could leave the island with that kind of money? The world government's money wasn't so easily taken. Or did he think that Doflamingo, the underworld broker, would help him escape? After observing for a while, Wood determined that Diaz Barrels didn't seem like the type who was hiding some extraordinary power. His crew was just a standard pirate group. With that settled, Wood decided to make his move. To maintain secrecy, Wood used his incredible speed to bypass the guards and appear directly in Diaz Barrels' cabin. Inside the cabin, Diaz Barrels, who had been under significant stress for some time, saw a stranger suddenly appear. He immediately sprang towards a wooden chest, assuming a defensive stance and ready to call for help. But before he could utter a word, the long blade of Tenku left a thin red line on his throat. The blood that dripped was swiftly absorbed by Tenku, making the blade appear even more sinister and sharp. Please, no need for alarm, Mr. Diaz Barrels. I didn't come here with ill intentions. I am here to discuss a potential collaboration. Wood said calmly. Wood didn't kill Diaz Barrels outright because he wasn't particularly interested in the Operation Fruit model, modification human. What caught his attention more was the 5 billion Baileys involved in the deal. The allure of immortality might have tempted many, but Wood wasn't one of them. After all, eternal life wasn't the same as invincibility. Just because you could live forever didn't mean you couldn't be killed. True power was the only thing that mattered. The Operation Fruit model, modification human could grant immortality, but the so-called eternal life didn't protect against death from unnatural causes. Otherwise, it would be the strongest devil fruit in existence. If Wood killed Diaz Barrels now, he could take the Operation Fruit model, modification human, but then the deal wouldn't go through. The world government and Doflamingo would immediately suspect something, and that would only complicate things unnecessarily. You certainly don't look like someone here to discuss cooperation, Diaz Barrels said, trying to maintain his composure. As a former Marine officer, Diaz Barrels still had a strong mental fortitude. After the initial shock, he managed to calm down and didn't call for his men outside. Clearly, he understood that the man who had just placed a blade at his throat could easily kill him, and if he couldn't defend himself, his men outside wouldn't stand a chance either. Wood sheathed Tenku, and Diaz Barrels visibly relaxed, letting out a heavy breath of relief. Wood casually took a seat, crossing one leg over the other as he got straight to the point. I've heard that you possess a devil fruit that can grant immortality. That interests me somewhat. Wood's words didn't surprise Diaz Barrels in the least. After carefully scrutinizing the young man before him, he recognized him as none other than the infamous Marine defector, Wood, who had been making waves across the seas recently. Although both of them were Marine defectors, Diaz Barrels, who had been a pirate for several years, was nothing compared to the man before him. A man who had only been active for about a year yet had already committed several high-profile acts and earned a bounty of 1 billion Baileys. There had been rumors that Wood's strength was overrated and that his billion-berry bounty was inflated. But from their brief encounter, Diaz Barrels could tell that the young man's power was genuine. When Wood's blade had touched his throat, Diaz Barrels had felt the immense pressure of a true pirate worth 1 billion Baileys. A suffocating aura of inevitability and death. For someone as powerful as Wood to approach him, a third-rate pirate, Dias Barrels couldn't fathom what his crew could possibly offer to someone of such caliber. If there was anything, it had to be the Operation Fruit model, modification human, which was worth 5 billion Baileys and rumored to grant eternal life. If you're after the Operation Fruit model, modification human, I'm afraid you're too late. Dias Barrels began. Even if you kill me and take it, the world government and Doflamingo will hunt you down relentlessly. As a former Marine, you should know better than anyone how obsessed those in power are with immortality. He was outmatched by Wood, but Dias Barrels hoped to use the names of the world government and Doflamingo to scare Wood off. I already told you, I am here to propose a deal, not to rob or kill. Wood replied, his tone calm. Do you really think a scoundrel like Doflamingo, who operates in the underworld, would keep his word with someone like you? Don't forget what kind of world the underworld is. Doflamingo might honor agreements with the strong, but do you really think you're one of them? Chapter 205, Plotting Against Doflamingo? Upon hearing Wood's words, Dias Barrels' expression immediately shifted. It was evident that if Wood dared to make such claims, he must have somehow uncovered information that Dias Barrels wasn't privy to. The allure of eternal life brought by the Operation Fruit model, modification human is something very few can resist. Doflamingo is no different. Wood continued calmly. So, while he's orchestrating your transaction with the world government, he's already planned to double-cross you. In other words, neither the Operation Fruit model, modification human nor the 5 billion Baileys will leave this island in your possession. Your pirate crew may very well be wiped out here. At this point, Dias Barrels had already begun to suspect the possibility of Doflamingo betraying him, especially after hearing Wood's accusations. But he never imagined that Doflamingo would be bold enough to target the world government as well. This can't be. Doflamingo may be a notable figure in the underworld, but he's still just a rising star. There's no way he'd have the guts to cross the world government. Dias Barrels objected, his initial shock giving way to the reasoning he thought would refute Wood's claims. It wasn't long before he considered that perhaps Doflamingo wasn't yet powerful enough to openly defy the world government, which reassured him slightly. Seems like your strength isn't the only thing lacking, your brain's not working too well either. Wood mocked with a hint of amusement. If Doflamingo were to take the Operation Fruit model, modification human from you, do you really think the world government would just let him walk away? Sure, he could hand it over and pocket the 5 billion Baileys. But do you honestly believe that he'd pass up the chance for eternal life for a mere 5 billion Baileys? Wood leaned forward slightly, his eyes glinting with calculated intent. If I were Doflamingo, I'd eliminate both sides. That way, I'd get the 5 billion Baileys and the Operation Fruit model, modification human. Then, I'd simply pin the blame on you after you're dead. Dias Barrels tried to interject, but Wood was already anticipating his argument. Maybe you think the world government wouldn't believe Doflamingo's story. But that's where you're mistaken. You don't know Doflamingo's true background, do you? Wood continued, unfazed. He might be known as the heavenly demon and a joker in the underworld, but he's also a former world noble, with the blood of the Don Quixote family. One of the celestial dragons running through his veins. Doflamingo has his connections within the world government and can easily manipulate them to believe his version of events. The more Wood spoke, the colder Dias Barrels' back became. He suddenly realized that if everything was indeed as Wood claimed, he and his crew had been nothing more than puppets in Doflamingo's hands from the start. Whether or not he received the 5 billion Baileys was irrelevant now. The likelihood was that they wouldn't leave the island alive. Dias Barrels considered fleeing, but he quickly dismissed the thought. If he ran now, neither the world government nor the underworld would spare him. And he was sure Doflamingo wouldn't just let him go after all the planning that had gone into this scheme. Simply put, Dias Barrels was trapped in Doflamingo's game, with no choice but to play his part. Wood, the so-called marine trader. What exactly do you propose? Since you knew so much before coming here and sought me out to collaborate, you must have a plan. Dias Barrels asked, his voice laced with a mix of desperation and curiosity. Neither the world government nor the Don Quixote family were forces that Dias Barrels believed he could contend with on his own. After thinking things over, he realized that his only chance of survival might lie in teaming up with Wood. It seems you've finally understood the situation. Wood said with a smirk. If you want to survive the clash between these two powerful forces, your only hope is to work with me. After all, I wouldn't leave you empty-handed for your efforts. Once this is over, I'm willing to give you 2 billion Baileys out of the 5 billion. The remaining 3 billion and the Operation Fruit model, modification human will be mine. Hearing Wood's proposal, Dias Barrels' initial reaction was one of disbelief. Wood was practically taking everything. 6 out of 10 shares of the total loot, including the Operation Fruit model, modification human, which belonged to Diaz Barrel's crew in the first place. If the fruit were valued at 5 billion Baileys, Wood would be walking away with 80% of the haul. This is what you call a collaboration? Forgive me, but I don't see any sincerity in your offer. Diaz Barrel said, laughing bitterly. He had thought Doflamingo's demands were outrageous, but Wood seemed no better. Diaz Barrels, let's be clear. Without my involvement, you wouldn't even be able to leave this island alive, let alone negotiate for a share of the loot. Wood retorted, his tone growing more assertive. The fact that I'm offering you 2 billion Baileys is already generous on my part. You think the Operation Fruit model, modification human is yours? If it weren't for the risk of raising suspicion, I'd have no need for you at all. Do you really think you'd be standing here, bargaining with me if that were the case? At this stage in his career, Doflamingo's strength wasn't quite at the monstrous levels it would reach later, particularly with his devil fruit powers not yet fully awakened. However, his top officers were still formidable, and when combined with the world government's involvement, Wood wasn't confident that he could directly take on both forces at once. The system's mission required Wood to secure the Operation Fruit model, modification human, but he was equally tempted by the 5 billion Baileys. If he wanted to achieve both goals while minimizing risks, Diaz Barrels would need to play his part. Although Diaz Barrels continued to haggle with Wood for a long while, Wood remained firm on his terms, ultimately forcing Diaz Barrels to concede. As Wood had pointed out, Diaz Barrels had no other viable options left. His attempts to negotiate weren't just out of dissatisfaction with the terms but also a way of testing Wood's intentions. Wood's refusal to budge also suggested that he wasn't planning to betray Diaz Barrels after the deal, as being overly generous with the split would have raised red flags. Wood's insistence on his share indicated that he didn't plan to discard Diaz Barrels after using him, which slightly eased Diaz Barrels' fears of being a mere pawn. Despite his suspicions, Diaz Barrels knew he had no choice but to trust Wood. For now. Chapter 206, Wood's Marine code name. After negotiating the details of the collaboration with Diaz Barrels, Wood followed the instructions provided by Fleet Admiral Sengoku and made contact with Corazon, the undercover agent embedded in the Don Quixote family. When Corazon arrived at the designated meeting place and saw Wood in person, his expression was one of utter shock. He never expected that the man who had caused such havoc recently, breaking into Impel Down, killing a Navy branch captain, and assaulting an ICE lobby, was not only a super rookie with a 1 billion Baileys bounty but also a Marine undercover agent, just like himself. It was hard to believe that this figure, who had essentially dragged the reputation of the world government through the mud, was actually working for the Marines all along. The sacrifices made by Sengoku to protect Wood's cover must have been immense. Corazon couldn't help but wonder what would happen if Wood's true identity was ever exposed. The world government, especially Impel Down and Inai's lobby, would be furious beyond measure. You're the Marine trader Wood, the super rookie that's been making waves across the seas recently, aren't you? This island is the territory of the Don Quixote family. What brings you here? Corazon's tone was cautious, his words carefully chosen. Most undercover agents tend to keep a low profile, avoiding drawing attention to themselves. But Wood, the so-called Marine trader, had become one of the most talked about figures on the Grand Line recently. Although Wood had appeared at the exact location where Corazon had arranged to meet a Marine contact, he decided to maintain his disguise as a high-ranking member of the Don Quixote family, just to be safe. Lieutenant Commander Don Quixote Rosinante, there's no need for these pretenses. We're both undercover agents, after all. Being cautious is wise, but I assure you, my identity is legitimate. Wood continued, his tone confident. Your Marine code is 01746, and your code name is Corazon, directly under Fleet Admiral Sengoku. My Marine code is 09527, codename Dark Serpent, with the rank of Marine Headquarters Captain. Hearing Wood accurately state his Marine code and codename, Corazon's suspicions were completely dispelled. He quickly used his Devil Fruit ability, the Com Fruit model, soundless human Devil Fruit, to erect a soundproof barrier around them. If Corazon had harbored any doubts before, they vanished the moment Wood correctly identified his Marine code and codename. Only a handful of high-ranking Marines knew that information, and if Wood were truly a pirate, there was no way he could access such classified details. My apologies, Captain Wood, Corazon said, bowing slightly. I was merely being cautious. It's hard to believe that such a prominent figure, someone who has shaken the seas so recently, would actually be one of us. And your codename, Dark Jow, suggests that the headquarters has high expectations of you. Having spent considerable time within the Don Quixote family, Corazon wasn't entirely ignorant of Marine affairs. He knew that many special officers within Marine headquarters carried unique code names. Due to Sengoku's peculiar interest, These code names often combined colors with animals, typically marking out the elite within the organization. Okainu, Kizaru, Okiji. Doflamingo, who had deep connections within the world government, was already aware that these three were the future admirals in waiting. And then there were the recently famous Pink Rabbit and the record-breaking Brown Pig from the Marine Academy. Wood hadn't had a code name previously, he had been just another nameless officer. However, Sengoku had recently decided to assign him the code name Dark Jiao to help confirm his identity in the future. When Wood first heard his new code name, he was completely bewildered. In Marine headquarters, code names combining colors with animals were symbols of strength. Being given such a code name meant that his days of being a low-profile captain in his hometown were effectively over. The dark part of his code name represented his undercover role, hidden in the shadows. The Jiao was a mythical sea serpent, symbolizing a hidden power waiting to emerge, eventually to transform into a dragon. Although Sengoku's explanation was logical, Wood couldn't help but feel a bit overwhelmed by the significance of it all. Corazon, with his short blonde hair, red hooded cloak with heart-shaped decorations at the drawstring ends, and a black feathered coat, looked rather comical and flamboyant, especially with the clown makeup on his face and a cigarette hanging from his lips. This was the daily appearance he maintained within the Don Quixote family, a disguise that served as his camouflage. Thanks to his identity as Doflamingo's brother, Rosinante, despite not showing much strength, had managed to become a top officer in the Don Quixote family, known as Corazon. Captain Wood, Fleet Admiral Sengoku has likely briefed you on the situation. May I ask what your next steps are? Or what your plan is? Corazon inquired, his tone a mix of curiosity and concern. Now that he was certain Wood was indeed a Marine, Corazon felt both relief and disappointment. He was relieved that Sengoku had acted so quickly upon receiving his intel. But he was also disappointed that the only support sent was Wood alone. If Wood truly had the rumored strength to defeat Rear Admiral Jian, known as Pink Rabbit, and even go toe-to-toe with Marine hero Garp, Corazon would have had more confidence in their chances. But upon learning that Wood was merely an undercover agent with the rank of captain, Corazon began to suspect that the stories might have been exaggerated. Sure, Wood had been given a special code name like Akainu and the others, but unlike them, he was only a captain rather than a general. This suggested that Wood had more potential than actual power, and the tales of his exploits were likely part of a narrative spun by Sengoku to bolster his image. Having spent so long within the Don Quixote family, Corazon knew just how formidable Doflamingo and his officers were. Adding the world government into the mix made it hard to believe that Wood could contend with both forces. In fact, Corazon doubted that Wood could even create enough chaos on Minion Island to disrupt Doflamingo's plans and allow him to secure the Operation Fruit model, modification human for treating law. Of course, I have a plan. Wood began confidently. Even I'm not reckless enough to take on the world government and the Don Quixote family head-on. That's why I'll need your cooperation, Lieutenant Commander Don Quixote Rosinante. But you should know, once this is over, you may no longer be able to stay within the Don Quixote family. And there's a good chance this will be dangerous for you. Corazon listened intently as Wood outlined his plan within the soundproof barrier. After a moment of hesitation, Corazon ultimately agreed to Wood's proposal, understanding the risks involved. Chapter 207, Is There a Traitor Among Us? After deciding to steal the Operation Fruit model, modification human to save law, Corazon knew he was stepping into dangerous territory. Wood's plan, while risky, seemed more feasible than going it alone. A day had passed since the plan was set in motion. Dias Barrels, who initially agreed to meet the world government at a different location, suddenly contacted the Don Quixote family, stating that the deal would now take place on Minion Island. Changing the trade location at the last minute was a major inconvenience for the Don Quixote family. All the preparations they had made on the original island were now useless. Dias Barrels, you're making things difficult for me. I've already coordinated everything with the world government. Changing the location now is only going to raise suspicions. Doflamingo said, his voice carrying an edge as he spoke into the Den Mushi. Behind his sunglasses, Doflamingo's eyes gleamed dangerously. It was clear that Dias Barrel's sudden decision to change the trade location had not only irritated him but also sparked his suspicion. Could Dias Barrels have somehow caught wind of Doflamingo's plan to double-cross him? Otherwise, why would he suddenly change the location? The ones I'm dealing with are the world government. With the small-time pirate crew I've got, we wouldn't stand a chance if they tried anything. By choosing the location, I'm ensuring the trade goes smoothly. If the world government can't accommodate his simple request, then maybe this deal isn't worth it. Dias Barrels replied before abruptly hanging up, not giving Doflamingo a chance to respond. Doflamingo stared at the now silent Den Mushi, anger boiling up inside him as he crushed the receiver in his hand. Get Diamandi and Treble back here immediately. The trade's location has changed to Minion Island. Tell them to get there as fast as they can. In the Don Quixote family, ranks were represented by playing cards. As the captain, Doflamingo was the joker. The wild card. His top officers were the four suits, Pica as spades, Corazon as hearts, Treble as clubs, and Diamante as diamonds. After finalizing the trade details with Diaz Barrels, Doflamingo had sent Treble and Diamante to the original island to make preparations. Even for the Don Quixote family, taking on the world government's operatives wasn't a simple task. To avoid any mishaps, preparations were essential. Currently, Doflamingo was accompanied by the quiet Pica and his seemingly mute brother, Corazon. Diaz Barrel's sudden decision to change the location and push up the timeline wasn't just about avoiding the world government's tricks. Doflamingo could see that Diaz Barrels was really trying to avoid him. Changing the location was one thing, but moving up the timeline as well? That was clearly an attempt to prevent Doflamingo from setting up any preparations on Minion Island. So, what was it? Had Diaz Barrels suddenly gotten smart, or was there a leak within Doflamingo's own ranks? The thought of a traitor sent a surge of anger through Doflamingo. Those who knew him well would recognize that he was on the verge of an outburst. His anger wasn't just about Diaz Barrel's last-minute changes, it was the possibility that someone within his ranks had betrayed him. Doflamingo's plan to double-cross both the world government and Diaz Barrels was a closely guarded secret, known only to a few of his most trusted officers. To him, these people were either family or as close as family. Doflamingo had zero tolerance for betrayal. Anyone who dared to betray him, even those he held dear, would face the harshest consequences. Treble and Diamante hadn't had any direct contact with Diaz Barrels and were already on the other island before Minion Island even came into play. They couldn't possibly be the traitors. As for Pica and Corazon, Doflamingo's gaze flicked over them both. He quickly dismissed the idea. Pica had been by his side since they arrived on Minion Island, and if Corazon were the traitor, he would have needed to meet with Diaz Barrels in person. But Diaz Barrels had been under surveillance the entire time, and Doflamingo's informants would have reported any such meeting. After some hesitation, Doflamingo concluded that it was more likely Diaz Barrels had simply gotten wise. The people around him had either risen through the ranks with him or were his blood relatives. None of them would betray him to help a complete stranger like Diaz Barrels. Diaz Barrels had clearly sensed danger and decided to change the trade location and time. But Doflamingo wasn't worried in the slightest. After determining that his officers weren't traitors, his confidence returned. So what if Diaz Barrels had detected something amiss? If Doflamingo hadn't came to Minion Island himself, Diaz Barrels might have had a chance to escape. But now that they were on the same island, did Diaz Barrels seriously think he could escape Doflamingo's grasp? The thought made Doflamingo smirk. He had been wise to personally oversee the situation on Minion Island, ensuring that neither Diaz Barrels nor the Operation Fruit model, modification human could slip away. Doflamingo hadn't killed Diaz Barrels outright for the same reason as Wood, to avoid alerting the world government prematurely. Even with this unexpected change in plans, Doflamingo remained confident that he could secure both the Operation Fruit model, modification human and the 5 billion Baileys. The only real challenge was dealing with the world government's agents. As for Diaz Barrels, Doflamingo didn't even consider him a threat. His top officers alone were more than capable of crushing a third-rate pirate crew like Diaz Barrels. When the day of the trade finally arrived, the world government's fleet appeared on schedule near Minion Island. Despite the last-minute changes to the trade location and time, the world government didn't show any signs of displeasure as Doflamingo had anticipated. On the contrary, the world government was eager to proceed with the trade as soon as possible. The lure of immortality was a temptation few could resist, especially those in positions of power. The higher-ups in the world government had already been pressing for the deal to go through as quickly as possible. Chapter 208, The Birdcage. On Doflamingo's fury whether changing the location of the trade posed any danger wasn't something that concerned the world government's fleet. As agents of the world government, they carried a certain pride with them. They had already investigated Diaz Barrels, a former Navy officer, now just a leader of a third-rate pirate crew. Hardly worth noting in the New World. In a place like this, his crew wasn't even considered second-tier, they were mere small fry. As for Doflamingo, sure, he was a former celestial dragon, but that was in the past. He might be doing well in the underworld now, but everyone knew it was because of the world government's backing. As long as he had any sense, he wouldn't dare to make a move against them. With this misplaced confidence, a 100-man team led by several Navy vice admirals and Cypher Pol Zero agents disembarked on Minion Island. The vice admirals accompanying them weren't from Navy headquarters but from various large branches in the New World. Among them was Virgo, the original Corazon and Doflamingo's mole within the Navy. When the world government's team arrived, Doflamingo greeted them with a smile, but the Cypher Pol Zero agent leading the group showed no interest in pleasantries. He asked curtly, "Where's the pirate crew we're supposed to trade with? And the Operation Fruit model, modification human? You're not planning to change the terms at the last minute, are you? The higher-ups in the world government are getting impatient. You know the consequences of toying with us, don't you?" Seeing that the Cypher Pol Zero agent was in no mood to be polite, Doflamingo dropped the pretense of humility. In his mind, these people were already as good as dead. However, he couldn't help but feel annoyed that Dias Barrels hadn't shown up yet. The world government and Doflamingo had both arrived early, but the man they considered a small-time pirate was keeping them waiting. Just as Doflamingo was about to send Pika to fetch Dias Barrels, the pirate crew finally made their appearance. Dias Barrels strode forward, carrying a small case, and stood before the world government and Doflamingo. With both sides in place, all that was left was to confirm the contents of the case and proceed with the exchange. However, Dias Barrels didn't follow the usual script. As soon as he appeared, he tossed the case straight to the world government's representatives. Everyone instinctively assumed that the case contained the valuable Operation Fruit model, modification human, worth 5 billion Baileys. As the case flew towards Cypher Pol Zero agent, Doflamingo acted without hesitation, using his string fruit ability to shoot a sharp wire toward the case. The sudden attack caught the world government's people off guard. But understanding the importance of the Operation Fruit model, modification human, the Cypher Pol Zero agent endured the injury to his shoulder and managed to catch the case. When he opened it, though, his anger flared. It was empty. He had been tricked. It was all Doflamingo's idea. Dias Barrels declared loudly. He has the Operation Fruit model, modification human. This whole trade was just a ruse to get your 5 billion Baileys and pin the blame on me. You saw for yourselves, Doflamingo really did plan to attack you. I'm not making this up. Dias Barrels' words not only infuriated the world government's agents but also sent Doflamingo into a rage. He had thought he had everything under control, but he hadn't expected this small-time pirate to have the guts to play both sides. Just as Doflamingo was about to lash out and kill Dias Barrels, Corazon suddenly grabbed him from behind, an urgent look on his face. As Doflamingo moved to shake him off, Corazon handed him a note. Since Corazon was known in the Don Quixote family as someone who couldn't speak, this was the only way he could communicate. Reading the note, Doflamingo's anger only grew, but he managed a bitter laugh. According to Corazon, while monitoring Dias Barrels' crew, he had discovered that the pirate's first mate was attempting to flee the island with the Operation Fruit model, modification human. The note explained why Dias Barrels had acted the way he did. Throwing the empty case to the world government was not just a way to provoke them and create a conflict between them and the Don Quixote family, it was also a diversion. His first mate was trying to escape with the real Operation Fruit model, modification human, while everyone's attention was elsewhere. If the battle ended and the Don Quixote family scoured many an island without finding the fruit, they wouldn't kill Dias Barrels. With the Operation Fruit model, modification human in hand, Dias Barrels could negotiate for his life and maybe even strike a deal with the Don Quixote family. Dias Barrels had planned his escape cleverly, but unfortunately for him, Corazon had spotted the plan in time. With the first mate trying to flee, there was no way Doflamingo would let them get away. Birdcage. Doflamingo unleashed his attack, sending countless threads shooting into the sky like a volcanic eruption. As they reached a great height, they rained down like a meteor shower, forming a massive dome over the island. The threads formed an enormous birdcage that encompassed the entire island, their sharp edges cutting through anything in their path. Not only did the threads form an impenetrable barrier, but they also began to close in, shrinking toward the center of the island. The threads were sharp enough to slice through the island's vegetation and even the hardest rocks. The birdcage technique was one of Doflamingo's most powerful moves, typically reserved for desperate situations. But this time, he used it right from the start. He couldn't afford to let Dias Barrels' first mate escape with the Operation Fruit model, modification human. With the birdcage in place, the entire island was now trapped. No one inside could escape, their lives were entirely in Doflamingo's hands. Chapter 209, Lured into a Trap? Dias Barrels, I must admit, you're a bit more resourceful than I anticipated. But if you think a little scheme like this is enough to take me down, you're far too naive. Did you really believe that by sending your first mate away with the Operation Fruit model, modification human, you could ensure your safety? Do you truly think your first mate can escape from me now? As he glared at Dias Barrels from a short distance away, Doflamingo wore a smug grin, confident that he had everything under control. Dias Barrels, on the other hand, looked up at the birdcage in the sky with a grim expression. But after a moment, a sense of relief washed over him. Thank goodness he had chosen to collaborate with the Navy traitor Wood. Without Wood, none of them, neither the world government operatives nor his own crew, would have had a chance to escape Doflamingo's deadly birdcage. Doflamingo noticed the shift in Dios Barrel's expression. Despite his plan being exposed, Dios Barrels didn't appear panicked. This unexpected calmness left Doflamingo with a sense of unease, as if something was happening outside of his calculated control. He initially intended to finish Dios Barrels off with a swift 5-colored strings attack, but instead, he adjusted his aim at the last second. The attack missed Dios Barrels, but several veteran members of his pirate crew were sliced to pieces by the razor-sharp strings. Ha ha ha. So, you've figured it out too, haven't you? What makes you so sure the Operation Fruit model, modification human in my first mate's possession is even real? Dios Barrels taunted, his voice dripping with confidence. As the blood of his fallen crew splattered onto his face, Dios Barrels felt a chill run down his spine, a stark reminder of the vast power gap between him and Doflamingo. Doflamingo's forehead veins bulged with anger as he heard Dios Barrels speak so nonchalantly. He had personally verified that the devil fruit in Dios Barrels' possession was indeed the Operation Fruit model, modification human when they arrived on Minion Island. Moreover, Dios Barrels and his crew had been under the Don Quixote family's watchful eyes ever since. They hadn't had any chance to leave the island. This meant the Operation Fruit model, modification human was still somewhere on Minion Island. But whether it was actually in the first mate's hands was now uncertain. The island wasn't enormous, but it wasn't small either. If Dios Barrels had hidden the Operation Fruit model, modification human somewhere, finding something the size of a regular fruit would be like searching for a needle in a haystack. Determined to get to the bottom of it, Doflamingo grabbed the broken and beaten Dios Barrels from the ground and leapt into the air. He was heading towards the location Corazon had hinted at, hoping to find the first mate and the elusive devil fruit. Doflamingo's ability to hover in midair wasn't due to mastering the moonwalk technique of the 6 powers. Instead, it was an application of his devil fruit, the string fruit model, thread human devil fruit, string fruit. Sky path. By attaching near invisible strings to the clouds, Doflamingo could move at high speeds through the air, as if he were walking on invisible pathways. The idea that clouds had any physical substance was absurd, but then again, this was a world where the laws of science often took a backseat to the rules of a shonen manga. Seeing Doflamingo trap the island in his birdcage and then take off to chase after the Operation Fruit model, modification human, the world government operatives moved to intercept him. They had deduced from his actions that Doflamingo was after the Operation Fruit model, modification human for himself. While Dios Barrel's story might not have been entirely credible, Doflamingo's intention to eliminate everyone present had become abundantly clear. However, just as the world government agents were about to make their move, they were intercepted by Pika and the other Don Quixote family officers who had been lying in wait. Even the vice admirals of the Navy, who had yet to take action, were ruthlessly betrayed by Virgo, one of their own, and fell dead in pools of their own blood, their eyes wide open in disbelief. The forces that the world government had brought to overpower the Don Quixote family were now evenly matched, thanks to Virgo's betrayal and the deaths of several vice admirals. Virgo's inclusion in the world government's contingent had been carefully orchestrated by Doflamingo. If everyone involved in the deal ended up dead, it would be easier for Doflamingo to pin the blame on the missing Dios Barrels. However, his word alone wouldn't be enough to clear him of suspicion, even with his connections as a former celestial dragon. That's why Virgo, the original Corazon, was critical. As a surviving Navy vice admiral, Virgo would corroborate Doflamingo's story, claiming that Dios Barrels had hidden his true strength and made off with the 5 billion Baileys and the Operation Fruit model, modification human during the deal. Truth be told, Doflamingo's plan was almost flawless. He had even accounted for the aftermath. Even if Fleet Admiral Sengoku, through Corazon, pieced together the truth, the only fallout would be Virgo being exposed as a mole. It would have no real impact on Doflamingo himself. But what Doflamingo hadn't anticipated was the wild card in his perfect plan. Wood, the troublemaker. Soaring through the sky with Dios Barrels in tow, Doflamingo soon spotted the first mate on the ground, clutching a briefcase and desperately trying to evade the shrinking birdcage. To Doflamingo, Dios Barrels and his crew were insignificant, barely worth his attention. He hadn't bothered to learn much about them. When he saw a young pirate scrambling on the ground with the briefcase, Doflamingo unleashed a footstring aimed at the pirate's arm, intending to slice it off cleanly. The fine, nearly invisible string tore through the ground like a hot knife through butter, leaving a deep gash in its wake. Doflamingo hadn't aimed to kill the pirate, only to sever the arm holding the briefcase. Clang. But just as Doflamingo expected his string to slice through the pirate's arm, something completely unexpected happened. Chapter 210, This is no mere vice captain. To be honest, Doflamingo never really considered the vice captain of the Diaz Barrels pirates worth his time. He thought that once he found the man, acquiring the Operation Fruit model, modification human, Op Fruit, would be a simple task. However, just as Doflamingo assumed that this nobody of a pirate would scream in agony after losing an arm, something unexpected happened. As Doflamingo's overheat string cut effortlessly through the ground, on a direct path to sever his opponent's arm, the vice captain suddenly intercepted the attack with a long sword, holding the string back with all his might. At the same moment, the vice captain, who had previously appeared frightened and unremarkable, lifted his head slightly, smirking as he looked up at Doflamingo hovering in the air. Sparks flew in the air as Doflamingo's overheat collided with a blade of the vice captain's sword. But this clash didn't last long. To Doflamingo's shock, the string of his attack was sliced clean through by a single strike from the sword. This one exchange was enough to convince Doflamingo that the man standing before him wasn't the real vice captain of the Diaz Barrels pirates. Diaz Barrels himself wasn't much of a fighter. Doflamingo could likely defeat him in just 3 moves. But this so-called vice captain could cut through Doflamingo's string attack with a single blow. This kind of strength was far beyond that of an average swordsman. A vice captain stronger than the captain? And one who was unknown, without a bounty or any reputation? Who would believe that nonsense? Alright, you caught me. I'm not really the vice captain of the Diaz Barrels pirates. But I do have the Operation Fruit model, modification human. Don't you want it, Joker? Wood said, dropping the pretense as he discarded his disguise and returned to his true form. Doflamingo's eyes widened as he recognized the man before him. His expression turned from confusion to understanding. So it's you, the marine trader, Wood. I didn't expect Diaz Barrels to have connections with someone like you. Now I understand why he's been acting so strangely lately. It was all your doing. Doflamingo couldn't help but recognize Wood. As a prominent figure in the underworld, Doflamingo had his ear to the ground for any significant developments across the seas. Wood's name had been circulating widely in the underworld lately, especially after he betrayed the Marines and made a name for himself as a rogue. Doflamingo knew that with his billion-berry bounty, Wood had caught the attention of many powerful figures who were eager to bring him into their ranks. It didn't surprise Doflamingo that Wood knew about the Operation Fruit model, modification human. After all, anyone involved in the underworld would have heard rumors about it. What puzzled Doflamingo was why Wood would dare to get involved, knowing that Doflamingo had already set his sights on the fruit. A billion-berry bounty sounds impressive. Doflamingo sneered. But did you really think you could lure me here and take me down? Don't forget, a bounty doesn't equate to strength. I've been a pirate since I was 10 years old, and now I'm 25. Compared to my experience, you're just a rookie. Doflamingo's voice was cold as he continued. That devil fruit you're holding isn't something you can handle. If you hand it over now, I might let you walk away, out of respect for how much you've annoyed the world government. Of course, Doflamingo wasn't being merciful out of the kindness of his heart. His real concern was that Wood might destroy the Operation Fruit model, modification human in a desperate move. If Wood handed over the fruit, Doflamingo would indeed spare him. But only because Wood was a more valuable scapegoat than Diaz Barrels ever could be. After all, a billion-berry pirate who had crossed the world government and Cypher Pol Zero agent multiple times would be a perfect fall guy for stealing the fruit and disrupting the deal. As for Diaz Barrels, now that Doflamingo had found the Operation Fruit model, modification human, the man had outlived his usefulness. There was no reason to keep him around. Seeing Doflamingo draw closer, one hand gripping Diaz Barrels by the throat while the other hand extended razor-sharp strings toward him, Diaz Barrels panicked and began to beg Wood for help. But before Wood could make a move, Doflamingo had already slit Diaz Barrels' throat with his strings, watching coldly as the man struggled and then died in his grasp. Wood hadn't wanted to let Diaz Barrels die. At least not out of any sense of loyalty. The truth was that once Doflamingo had him in his grasp, there was nothing Wood could do to save him. Doflamingo wasn't someone to be underestimated, and approaching him recklessly would have been dangerous. Besides, in Wood's eyes, Diaz Barrels had only himself to blame for his fate. According to the original plan, Diaz Barrels was supposed to hand over an empty chest to the world government, spark a conflict, and then escape in the ensuing chaos. But the man's ambition had far exceeded his abilities. When he saw Doflamingo's family clashing with the world government, he thought he could swoop in and take the 5 billion Baileys for himself. He had overestimated his strength and underestimated Doflamingo's. The result was inevitable. After just a few exchanges, Doflamingo easily captured him. Dias Barrels hadn't managed to get the 5 billion Baileys, and now he had lost his life as well. Watching Dias Barrels die, Wood felt nothing. After all, they weren't really allies, and with Dias Barrels gone, Wood wouldn't have to split the money. There was nothing wrong with that. Chapter 211, A Betrayal Met with Another Betrayal. Doflamingo tossed the lifeless body of Dias Barrels aside as if it were trash. He then fixed Wood with a cruel smile, the kind that seemed to say, "This is what happens when you don't know your place. I'll give you one last chance." Doflamingo said, his voice cold and menacing. "Whatever Dias Barrels promised you, I'll double it. Hand over the op fruit, and I'll let you walk away with your life. We're both players in the underworld. Who knows? We might need to work together again someday." Doflamingo still believed Wood might accept his offer. On one hand, he wanted Wood to live so he could take the blame if things went wrong. On the other, Wood had caught the eye of a powerful figure in the underworld, someone even Doflamingo wasn't eager to cross unless absolutely necessary. "Barrels offered me the op fruit and 3 billion Baileys," Wood replied, his voice calm. "So, Doflamingo, are you saying you'll give me 2 op fruits and 6 billion Baileys?" At Wood's words, Doflamingo's face twisted in anger. In an instant, he lunged at Wood, his fingers pulling taut several strings as he slashed at Wood with his Kashikido, 5-color strings. "If you're so determined to die, then today is the day you'll meet your end, rookie." Doflamingo snarled. He clearly believed Wood was mocking him. Not only was it impossible to find 2 op fruits in the world, but the idea of offering 6 billion Baileys was ludicrous. The world government had brought only 5 billion Baileys to negotiate. There was no way Doflamingo would go beyond that, let alone add another billion. "Business is business, Doflamingo," Wood said, blocking the attack with his sword. "Tenko. Why are you getting violent all of a sudden? It's true that Barrels offered me 80% of this deal up front. But even if you could give me 2 op fruits in cash, I still wouldn't accept. I've already promised the op fruit to someone else as payment. And let's be honest, dealing with someone as infamous as you is risky. After all, your last business partner is lying dead not far from here." Wood countered Doflamingo's close-range attack, his other hand drawing his sword, Churro, unleashing a blue energy slash toward his opponent. Doflamingo quickly leapt back to dodge, but the crescent-shaped slash dug a deep trench in the ground as it chased him. Ashisorito. Foot instant transmission thread, Doflamingo executed a quick sweeping kick, releasing nearly invisible strings that sliced through Wood's energy attack, shattering it into pieces. The battle was just beginning. As the energy dissipated, Wood vanished from his original position, using a rapid sequence of instant transmission techniques to close the distance. When Doflamingo shattered the energy slash, Wood suddenly appeared behind him. The idea that a wound on the back is a swordsman's shame didn't mean much to Wood. To him, any opening was a chance to strike. Whether it was the back or any other vulnerable spot, it didn't matter. The world of pirates was brutal, far from the simple games some might imagine. The key to survival was seizing every opportunity to bring down your opponent. Doflamingo's observation hockey, warned him of the danger from behind, but it was too late to fully defend with his devil fruit abilities. He quickly coated his arm in armament hockey, using it to block Wood's blade. As Tenko's blade clashed with Doflamingo's arm, the bright silver of the sword began to darken, turning pitch black. Wood had activated his own armament hockey. Although Wood's hockey wasn't as refined or powerful as Doflamingo's, the sharpness of his blade compensated, causing black sparks to fly as their hockey collided. A hallmark of a true New World battle. Despite Doflamingo's greater experience and strength in hockey, Wood's well-timed attack, combined with the cutting power of his blade and his swordsmanship, forced Doflamingo to his knees. The ground cracked beneath him as he struggled to hold off Wood's assault. Anyone watching could see that if this continued, Doflamingo's armament hockey would give out first. Yet, even in this precarious situation, Doflamingo didn't show any signs of panic. Instead, at one moment, a sly smile spread across his face. Almost simultaneously, Wood's own observation hockey alerted him to a new threat from behind. Doflamingo's Kageyachido, Shadow Rider thread, stood poised to strike, its arm raised, ready to slash down with deadly precision. 5 wires, sharp as blades, shot toward Wood like the claws of a predator. Kageyachido, a technique Doflamingo could use to create a clone of himself entirely out of strings. This puppet was indistinguishable from the real thing, making it a perfect tool for a surprise attack. While Wood had been focused on the battle in front of him, Doflamingo had maneuvered the clone into position, waiting for the perfect moment to strike from behind and deliver a killing blow. As the Kageyachido brought its attack down on Wood, Doflamingo's grin widened. "Let me show you, brat." Doflamingo sneered. What happens when a real pirate who's sailed the seas for years faces a rookie like you? You're nothing but a joke. A betrayal met with another betrayal. Wood had thought he was the one launching a surprise attack, but Doflamingo had anticipated it all along, setting up a counterattack. To Doflamingo, Wood's armament hockey was decent, but not exceptional. With his back wide open, Doflamingo was certain that once the Kageyachito pierced through Wood, the so-called super rookie would be finished. But Doflamingo didn't know that Wood's observation hockey was highly unique. Though the moment of danger lasted only a fraction of a second, Wood perceived it as if time had slowed down, the Kageyachito's movements breaking into a series of clear, segmented images. Chapter 212, Corazone's attempt to reap the spoils? Hyaki Yagio Akitro, Kagami Onna. 100 Ghosts Swordsmanship, Needlewoman. Under the influence of Wood's advanced observation hockey, what should have been a lightning-fast strike from Doflamingo's Kageyachito, Shadow Rider thread, was perceived in a series of slowed-down frames. In that brief moment, Wood quickly identified a critical flaw in the movement of Doflamingo's clone. With an effortless thrust, Wood sent his blade, Assetso, from under his arm, piercing through the air and driving straight into the head of Doflamingo's Kageyachito. Sorry, what was that you were trying to show me? I didn't quite catch it. Wood mocked. The backward thrust shattered the head of the Kageyachito, but since the clone was made entirely of the threads created by the string fruit model, thread human devil fruit, string fruit, it didn't bleed or exhibit any signs of life, and Doflamingo himself wasn't physically harmed. However, while the attack caused no physical damage, it certainly wounded Doflamingo's pride. He had believed his maneuver would guarantee his victory, thinking his Kageyachito would strike down Wood with ease. That's why he had indulged in his usual habit of taunting his enemy, fully expecting to watch them die in frustration and defeat. But now, Doflamingo found himself on the receiving end of the mockery. The fact that Wood had so casually dismantled what Doflamingo had considered a surefire attack sent a jolt of anger through him. The Kageyachito did not die from the head wound. Under Doflamingo's control, it quickly reassembled and launched another attack, several strings shooting forward to strike Wood. However, by the time the clone had recovered, Wood was already prepared. With his left hand, he gripped Assetso in a reverse hold, blocking the clone's Kashikito, 5 color strings, while his right hand, still holding Tenku, cursed sword, in a clash against Doflamingo's arm, unleashed a kick infused with a powerful air slash. Tempest Kick, Getsuaku. Tempest Kick, Moon White, Tempest Kick, one of the Marine 6 styles, 6 powers, involves kicking with such force that the leg generates a compressed air blade. Of all the techniques within the 6 powers, this and instant transmission were the ones Wood had mastered most extensively. The white crescent-shaped slash grew larger as it cut through the wind, speeding toward Doflamingo, whose face twisted into a look of shock as the attack closed in. Though Doflamingo immediately coated his chest with armament hockey, to defend against the incoming Tempest Kick, the powerful impact of the white crescent still sent him hurtling backward, crashing through the forest. Doom! 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 A rhythmic pounding echoed through the forest as Doflamingo was violently hurled into the trees. Birds, startled by the noise, took to the air, only to collide with the threads of the Torakago birdcage, slicing them into pieces that rained back down to the ground. Doflamingo's body crashed through several large trees before he managed to stop his momentum by shooting out strings from his fingertips, wrapping them around the surrounding trees to halt his backward slide. A faint line of blood now marked his previously unscathed chest. Despite the armament hockey dulling the attack, leaving only a shallow cut that barely qualified as an injury, the slash had nonetheless made its mark. Although Tempest Kick is a versatile technique, the power behind it can't compare to a blow from a legendary sword. If it could, every practitioner of the 6 powers Tempest Kick would be a swordsman. As Doflamingo was sent flying by the white crescent, the uncontrolled Kageyachito stumbled like a puppet with its strings cut, and Wood easily sliced it into several pieces. Seeing his life-sized clone, a perfect replica, being so effortlessly dismantled by Wood, Doflamingo felt a surge of rage. Tijki Koban. Overheat, Doflamingo stretched his arm backward, launching dozens of nearly invisible threads from his hand. The threads twisted together into a thick, hair-like cord and shot toward Wood from an incredible distance. At a glance, it might have resembled Luffy's Gamu Gamu no pistol, Gum Gum pistol, but in terms of destructive power, there was no comparison. The line of trees that Doflamingo's overheat passed through, trees so large they would normally require 2 men to embrace them, were sliced cleanly in half with ease, their trunks smooth and even. Overheat not only had an exceptionally long range, but its speed was almost instantaneous. Wood's observation hockey barely registered the incoming attack in time. He raised his sword to block, but the massive force behind the strike nearly knocked the blade from his grip. Dust rose in a long, straight line through the forest, extending for tens of kilometers. As if to repay Wood for his earlier tempest kick that had sent him sprawling, Doflamingo's overheat sent Wood hurtling through the air, crashing through the forest for miles. The sheer destruction left in the wake of their battle. Trees felled and deep trenches cut through the earth. Left Corazon and Trafalgar Law, who had been hiding nearby, utterly stunned. The reason Corazon and Law were hiding in the first place was because of the Operation Fruit model, modification human, Op Fruit, in Wood's possession. It was the only thing that could cure Law's terminal amber lead syndrome. Attempting to steal something from two powerful combatants was incredibly dangerous, but Corazon had the Com Fruit model, soundless human devil fruit, Com Fruit, which allowed him to create a zone of absolute silence. With the right timing, they might just have a chance. If Doflamingo won the fight, the Op Fruit would fall into the hands of the Don Quixote family. If Wood won, it would go to the Marines. Though Corazon was a Marine spy sent by Fleet Admiral Sengoku, it was obvious that the Marines wouldn't use a fruit worth 5 billion Baileys to save a child with no political value. So no matter who won the fight, Doflamingo or Wood, the Op Fruit would be lost to them. The only way to save Trafalgar Law was to steal the fruit themselves while the two combatants were distracted. Normally, stealing the Op Fruit under such circumstances would be impossible. But with Corazon's devil fruit ability lowering their presence, the impossible now seemed somewhat attainable. To be honest, when Corazon first learned that the Marine sent to retrieve the fruit was Wood, he had all but given up hope. Chapter 213, Conqueror's Hockey? So what? Wood, a former Marine turned traitor, known for causing havoc at Impel Down, clashing with Marine branches, and assaulting Anai's lobby. A pirate with a bounty of 1 billion Baileys. To most uninformed people, he must seem like a powerful and ruthless villain. However, only someone who had been in the Don Quixote family and understood Doflamingo's true nature, like Corazon, could see that his own brother was the real demon. Wood's reputation on the seas was notorious, but Corazon had initially believed that in a direct confrontation with Doflamingo, Wood would be at a disadvantage. Yet, after witnessing their ongoing battle, Corazon's opinion of Wood had completely changed. There was a reason why Wood had been given the codename Dark Serpent and why Fleet Admiral Sengoku held him in such high regard. First, he orchestrated events to create conflict between the Don Quixote family and the world government. Then, he lured Doflamingo into a trap, planning an ambush. Finally, he demonstrated his strength, living up to the rumors and proving that his bounty was entirely justified. In fact, he managed to suppress someone Corazon had always viewed as the epitome of evil. Doflamingo. Corazon-san, maybe we should just forget it, said the boy with the spotted hat beside Corazon, his voice full of worry. I'm not worth risking so much. The boy's skin was marked with gray spots, the telltale signs of amber lead syndrome, a mysterious and incurable disease that plagued the seas. There's no such thing as whether it's worth the risk or not. Life has its own weight, and that weight is equal for everyone. I understood this when I was just 8 years old. Even the world nobles, as high and mighty as they are, will die when they fall ill. Without their noble status, they, too, struggle for survival just like anyone else. Just as I was saved once, I believe it is fate that I met you, Law. Corazon replied, gazing at the boy suffering from amber lead syndrome. Images of his mother, who had died from illness, and of the time when Sengoku rescued him, flashed through Corazon's mind. The battle in the clearing continued to rage, growing even more intense as time passed. Blades clashed, and invisible threads filled the forest, slicing through entire trees, reducing them to mere stumps scattered across the ground. What was once a smooth surface was now a landscape of trenches and craters of varying sizes and depths. The two combatants had taken their fight from the ground to the sky, with their exchanges growing faster by the second. Doflamingo's physical abilities might not have been overwhelming to someone like Wood, who had mastered the 6 powers and trained at the Marine Academy. However, Doflamingo's mastery over his devil fruit and his expertise in using hockey were exceptional. In terms of hockey, Wood's observation hockey was superior, allowing him to read Doflamingo's movements better. However, in terms of armament hockey, Doflamingo had the upper hand. And while Doflamingo's observation hockey wasn't as unique as Wood's, it was still formidable, capable of sensing and evading attacks even from far above the island. Moreover, Doflamingo also wielded something Wood had yet to attain, Conqueror's Hockey. Of course, the most potent use of Conqueror's Hockey is through its infusion. Wrapping it around oneself to enhance attacks, allowing one to strike an opponent without even making physical contact. But only a select few top-tier warriors can achieve this advanced form, and Wood didn't believe that Doflamingo was among them. Aside from Conqueror's Hockey infusion, the typical use of Conqueror's Hockey in combat against another strong opponent was nearly pointless. Despite being labeled as a power that only those with the potential to rule can awaken, Conqueror's Haki only works effectively against those weaker than the user. A powerful individual could unleash their overwhelming spirit to intimidate, frighten, and even knock out weaker opponents en masse. In the midst of a large-scale battle, someone with Conqueror's Haki could stand alone, and with a burst of their will, they could make most of the weaklings collapse as if they were pests being sprayed with insecticide. However, in a one-on-one battle against another strong opponent, unless infused into one's attacks, Conqueror's Haki held little significance. Just as Wood and Doflamingo were demonstrating. Unable to overpower Wood, and having been repeatedly suppressed, Doflamingo, in a desperate attempt to reclaim his lost dignity, unleashed his Conqueror's Haki, flaunting it to Wood, as if to prove he possessed the qualities of a king. Unfortunately for Doflamingo, Wood met the surge of Conqueror's Haki with a calm expression and responded with a quick slash. He wasn't one of those mindless locals who would grovel before someone with Conqueror's Haki, eagerly submitting as a follower. As a transmigrator, Wood knew that in the world of One Piece, there were far too many so-called one-in-a-million individuals with kingly potential. Conqueror's Haki might symbolize the potential to rule, but it didn't always equate to strength. Some of the most powerful figures didn't possess Conqueror's Haki, yet they were still fearsome warriors. Doflamingo's Conqueror's Haki might be enough to intimidate the weak, but against a powerful swordsman with a strong will, like Wood, its impact was negligible. The twin crescent-shaped slashes from Tenku and Asatsa severed Doflamingo's web-like threads. The diminished slashes that followed were easily kicked to pieces by Doflamingo, his long legs coated in armament Haki. However, before Doflamingo could retract his leg, Wood had already appeared in front of him, using instant transmission to close the distance. Without hesitation, Wood's size 43 boot smashed into Doflamingo's face. Crack! A sharp sound echoed through the air. Whether it was Doflamingo's sunglasses shattering or his nose breaking under the impact, it was hard to tell. What was clear was that the force of the kick sent Doflamingo plummeting from the sky like a meteor, creating a massive crater upon impact with the ground. And by some twist of fate, Doflamingo landed right near Corazon and Trafalgar Law. At that very moment, Corazon and Law were about to retrieve the heart-shaped Operation Fruit model, modification human from its case. Doflamingo, who had just showcased his kingly potential with Conqueror's Haki, had not only failed to intimidate Wood but had taken a boot to the face for his troubles. As he dragged his battered body out of the crater, he suddenly found himself locking eyes with a startled Corazon and Trafalgar Law. At first, Doflamingo thought they had been clever enough to take advantage of the chaos to snatch the Operation Fruit model, modification human. However, when he saw Corazon trying to shove the priceless fruit into Law's mouth, Doflamingo's expression finally changed. Chapter 214, A Target on the Brink of Death. Doflamingo had long been aware of Corazon's constant search for a cure for Law. However, he found it curious. Corazon, known within the Don Quixote family for his disdain for children, would often scare them off for fun. Though, in truth, he did this to keep kids away from the Don Quixote family, but when it came to Trafalgar Law, the child-hating Corazon exhibited an unusual level of concern. This anomaly had always made Doflamingo suspicious of his brother. Yet, because Corazon was not only a high-ranking officer in the family but also his brother, Doflamingo had hesitated to act, preferring to wait until he had more information. However, the scene unfolding before his eyes now made everything painfully clear. All the inconsistencies, the unexplained events. They all made sense now. The plan to betray Barrels, initially known only to the top officers of the Don Quixote family, namely, Spade, Heart, Club, and Diamond, had somehow been leaked. How had Barrels suddenly gotten smarter? How had the marine traitor Wood become so aware of their plan? The truth was evident, there was a traitor in their midst. In hindsight, Doflamingo realized that his presence here was all because of Corazon's tip-off. Earlier, Doflamingo had believed that the only reason Corazon had returned alive after encountering Wood was that the traitor had deliberately spared him, perhaps to lure Doflamingo into a trap. After all, considering the strength Wood had displayed, it was hard to believe that Corazon could have discovered Wood without Wood noticing him first. And if Wood had noticed him, how had someone as relatively weak as Corazon managed to escape and deliver the message? Now, it was all clear to Doflamingo, this wasn't a case of Wood letting Corazon go. Corazon and Wood had been working together from the start. Good. Rosinante, I never imagined you could hide so well, and that you'd have the audacity to plot against me. Doflamingo seethed. Corazon's com fruit allowed him to create soundproof barriers, rendering all noise non-existent and his movements completely silent. Even strong opponents, if not paying close attention, would struggle to detect him. Corazon's plan had been going smoothly. He intended to use his devil fruit powers to secretly feed Law the op fruit, then hide him away on a remote island. Corazon could easily claim that Trafalgar Law had died from Amber Lead syndrome, and since his cover wasn't blown, he could continue his undercover mission within the Don Quixote family, serving justice. But fate often has a cruel sense of humor. Although Corazon and Law had succeeded in getting their hands on the Opop fruit and were just about to make their escape, Doflamingo, sent flying by one of Wood's kicks, had landed right beside them by sheer coincidence. The Cum fruit could silence noise, but it didn't grant invisibility. When Doflamingo's furious gaze locked onto Corazon's, it was clear that they had been exposed. As he stared into Doflamingo's shattered sunglasses and saw the veins bulging on his forehead, Corazon felt as if he were facing the same demon who had murdered their father all those years ago. His body began to tremble uncontrollably. Yet despite his fear, Corazon did not flee. Instead, he resolutely positioned himself between Doflamingo and Law, forcefully shoving the Opop fruit into Law's mouth. Bleh. This tastes awful. Law gagged. The Opop fruit, like all devil fruits, possessed incredible power, but its taste was notoriously terrible. For someone eating a devil fruit for the first time, Law found the experience revolting. Seeing the prized devil fruit he had been after consumed by a mere child, Doflamingo flew into a rage. Corazon's betrayal and the loss of the Opop fruit. Either event alone would have been enough to send Doflamingo into a fury. Together, they ignited an unprecedented wrath within him. Rosinante. Doflamingo hissed. It seems you've forgotten what I did 15 years ago. Well, I don't mind refreshing your memory. Perhaps driven by his seething anger, Doflamingo's fury seemed to cool, replaced by a sinister grin as he began to laugh, the sound echoing. Foo-foo-foo-foo. At the mention of 15 years ago, Corazon's expression darkened with hatred. He knew exactly what Doflamingo was referring to. An event that had haunted him for his entire life. 15 years ago, Doflamingo, his own brother, had coldly murdered their father right before his eyes. Not only that, but he had severed their father's head and brought it to Marijo's in a futile attempt to regain his status as a world noble. It was from that day forward that Corazon had came to see Doflamingo as a true demon. So, you plan to kill me just like you killed our father? I suppose that wouldn't weigh on your conscience at all. It looks like you can't beat that marine trader Wood, though. Too bad I won't be around to see you, a demon, dragged down to hell. Well, at this point, I guess I don't have any other regrets. Doflamingo's face twisted in surprise at Corazon's words, realizing how thoroughly he had been deceived. His shock quickly turned into blind rage as he charged at Corazon. Seeing Doflamingo's furious advance, Corazon shouted for Law to run and then, without hesitation, rushed to meet Doflamingo head-on. Corazon knew he wasn't a match for Doflamingo. But to buy Law enough time to escape, he had no other choice. Wood's kick had sent Doflamingo flying quite a distance. Even if Wood noticed what was happening and tried to intervene, it would still take him a few moments to arrive. But for someone as powerful as Doflamingo, killing both Corazon and Law would take only the blink of an eye. If it were just him and Law, no matter how selflessly Corazon fought to hold Doflamingo off, Law wouldn't be able to escape Doflamingo's clutches. However, Corazon knew that now that Law had eaten the Opop fruit, which was worth 5 billion Baileys, Wood, as a marine, would not stand by and let Doflamingo kill or abduct him. The Cum fruit offered little in the way of combat power. Corazon, who had been saved by Sengoku as a child, had received some training, but his mediocre talent meant that his strength was only enough to deal with weaklings. He was no match for Doflamingo, not even for a single round. As Doflamingo's razor-sharp threads drew closer, ready to tear Corazon apart, the rune symbols on Wood's chest suddenly began to glow. Chapter 215, Wood unleashes his true power from his position high in the sky. Wood had a clear view of the situation unfolding between Doflamingo and Corazon. He hadn't expected that his kick would so coincidentally send Doflamingo crashing right in front of Corazon and Law. Wood was, to put it mildly, irritated by Corazon's actions. According to their prior agreement, once Corazon lured Doflamingo to this location, Wood would hand over the Opop fruit as payment. But Corazon had apparently agreed only on the surface, while secretly planning to grab the fruit for himself. Is it just me, or do people in this pirate world have an inflated sense of their own intelligence? Or do they all just have a death wish? First, Dios Barrels tried to play both sides and got himself killed. Now Corazon is pulling the same stunt. Even as Wood muttered his frustration, in the next moment, he activated the power of his divine heart. By sacrificing a portion of his life force, he amplified his speed to several times its normal limit, turning the standard instant transmission technique into what could only be described as a super instant transmission. In the blink of an eye, Wood closed the 10-kilometer distance between himself and Doflamingo, appearing before him just in time to intercept the wires aimed at Corazon. Both Doflamingo and Corazon were stunned by Wood's sudden appearance. The speed he had just displayed was far beyond what any human should be capable of. But when Doflamingo noticed the glowing runes on Wood's chest, his expression shifted to one of realization. Like most people, Doflamingo assumed that the power of Wood's divine heart was a result of some devil fruit ability. Indeed, what human could achieve such impossible feats without the aid of a devil fruit? After all, these powers from the depths of the sea could even grant immortality. And what else but the power of a devil fruit could cause a human's chest to glow? Doflamingo's nearly invisible wires clashed against Wood's blade, sparks flying from the friction. To prevent his strings from being cut again, Doflamingo had reinforced them with armament hockey. But just as Doflamingo was confident that this time he wouldn't be overpowered, a terrifying force shot through his arm and into his body. The overwhelming pressure crushed him, sending him flying with even less resistance than before. Since Wood had already activated the power of his divine heart, he wasn't holding back. That single strike had been amplified several times by the divine heart, and it would have been a miracle if Doflamingo could have withstood it. As Doflamingo was sent hurtling backward, Wood decided not to waste any more life force. He dashed forward in pursuit, determined to end the battle quickly. Head toward the center of the island and stay out of the way. Wood snapped as he rushed past Corazon and Law. Wood was still frustrated with Corazon's deviation from the plan, and his irritation was evident in his tone. Despite both being undercover Marines, Wood wasn't particularly close to Corazon. If not for the mission's condition that Corazon had to survive, Wood might not have even bothered to expend life force to use the divine heart to intervene. After all, if Corazon had been killed just now, it would have been his own fault. Wood had clearly stated before that he would give Corazon the Apop fruit as a reward. But Corazon couldn't know what was going through Wood's mind, so he wasn't to blame entirely. Corazon had been in the Navy far longer than Wood and understood all too well that if the Apop fruit, a highly valuable devil fruit, fell into the Navy's hands, even the generous Fleet Admiral Sengoku would be unlikely to allow it to be used to save a child suffering from Amber Lead Syndrome. So from the start, Corazon had assumed that Wood's promise was an empty one, that the reward was something he'd never actually receive. That was why Corazon had taken the risk to try and steal the Apop fruit before Wood and Doflamingo's battle concluded. Corazon, why did he save us even though we deceived him? Law asked, his young voice tinged with confusion. Having grown up among the Don Quixote family, Law was familiar with the ruthless ways of pirates. He couldn't understand why Wood had came to their aid. Was it just because of their previous cooperation? But could pirates really be trusted to honor agreements? Corazon knew that Wood wasn't truly a pirate, but an undercover Marine. However, he couldn't share this classified information with Law. Instead, he followed Wood's advice and used his devil fruit powers to slip away with Law once more. Meanwhile, Doflamingo, who had been kicked into the trees by Wood, was in far worse shape than before. Despite coating his wires in armament hockey, they had still been severed by Wood's blade. Not only had his wires been cut, but now Doflamingo had a deep, bone-revealing wound slashing across his chest. Seeing Wood rapidly closing in on him again, Doflamingo gritted his teeth against the intense pain and raised his hands once more. Spider's web. From his hands, Doflamingo shot out countless strands of spider silk, quickly weaving them into a web in front of him. This web, created by the power of Doflamingo's string fruit, was as sharp as the threads of his birdcage. Capable of slicing through metal with ease. The spider's web offered a degree of defense, and if an enemy was foolish enough to charge straight into it, they could easily find themselves cut to pieces by the sharp threads. Based on the strength of the sword slashes Wood had unleashed earlier, Doflamingo had confidence in the defensive capabilities of his spider's web. But what Doflamingo didn't realize was that the Wood he faced now was completely different from before. Hyaki Yagio sword style, two-sword technique, Joragamo. The Joragamo, a spider demon with the body of a spider and the face of a woman, was a master of spinning webs. Wood's cursed sword, Tenku, and his other blade, Asetsu, moved in a blur, slashing the air at high speed. In moments, a large, square web of crisscrossing slashes formed in front of Wood, surging toward Doflamingo like a deadly net. Chapter 216, A Patchwork Monster? Seriously? The square-shaped web of slashes collided mid-air with Doflamingo's hexagonal spider's web. Although both were made of what should be delicate materials, the impact between them sent sparks flying and unleashed a massive ring of shock waves. As the two webs clashed and Doflamingo's spider's web was gradually compressed, his expression grew darker. It was painfully clear, even to someone as overconfident as Doflamingo, that Wood's current strikes were on a completely different level than before. There were only two possible explanations: either Wood had been holding back his true power earlier, or he had somehow grown exponentially stronger in an instant. Observing Wood carefully, Doflamingo noticed the one difference from before, the radiant glow of the runes on Wood's chest. When Wood's speed had surged earlier, Doflamingo had initially assumed it was some sort of devil fruit ability related to speed. But now, it was obvious that something far more profound was at play. The threads of the spider's web began to snap under the relentless pressure of the slashes. Finally, just as Doflamingo spat a mouthful of blood due to the injury on his chest, the web of slashes tore through his spider's web, descending upon him. Under the barrage of crisscrossing slashes, everything around them, trees, rocks, and the very earth, was cleaved into neat, uniform blocks. A cloud of dust erupted into the air as massive sections of the forest were cut down, leaving a gaping square-shaped scar in the once dense jungle. From above, it looked as if someone had carved out a massive chunk of the landscape with surgical precision. Wood landed lightly on a thick branch, the silvery glow of the runes on his chest fading until they disappeared entirely. He surveyed the devastated surroundings and was just about to leave and claim the 5 billion Baileys when a sudden, inexplicable sense of danger surged through him. Acting on pure instinct, Wood leaped from his perch just as several white threads burst from the ground where he had stood moments before, slicing a nearby tree into several pieces. Wood's eyes widened in shock at the sight. If he wasn't mistaken, this technique was supposed to be part of Doflamingo's devil fruit awakening. No, while it did resemble Doflamingo's awakened white thread waves, the power was far inferior. Even so, Wood could tell that Doflamingo had definitely begun to touch the edge of awakening his devil fruit powers. The string fruit, as its name suggested, allowed the user to create and manipulate various types of strings with cutting and controlling abilities. However, these strings needed to be produced by Doflamingo's body, as the string fruit was a Parimsha-type devil fruit, not a Logia. This meant it didn't allow for elemental transformation or the spontaneous generation of materials. But the threads that had just erupted from the ground were clearly different from his usual techniques. They had transformed from the very earth itself. Devil fruit awakening represented a higher level of mastery over one's abilities. As far as Wood knew, there were two types of awakenings. For Parimsha types, awakening allowed the user to affect things other than themselves, turning their surroundings into material they could manipulate. For zone types, awakening greatly enhanced their recovery and combat abilities, though failing to awaken could have serious side effects. Parimsha-type awakening, which allowed users to influence external objects, meant that the user could transform the environment into a terrain that favored their abilities, effectively turning the battlefield into a weapon. Before Wood could ponder further on Doflamingo's current state, more white threads shot up from the ground, tearing through everything around him with ruthless precision. Even with exceptional observation hockey, constantly dodging without a stable footing was a losing battle. It was only a matter of time before one of the threads found its mark. After narrowly avoiding another lethal attack that left a shallow cut on his face, Wood decided to use Moonwalk to stay in the air while searching for Doflamingo's hiding spot with his observation hockey. As Wood's feet tapped against the air, propelling him side to side to dodge the increasing number of threads, he slashed his sword, sending a powerful wind-laden slash in a specific direction. Hyaki Yagio sword style, one sword technique, Atachi. The green crescent-shaped slash carried with it a howling wind, the sound akin to the eerie cry of a weasel. It easily sliced through the mass of threads, roaring toward its target. Doflamingo, still hidden amidst the ruins, extended his arms to either side. With a swift motion, he pulled his hands together. Almost imperceptibly thin threads connected his fingers to two massive boulders on the ground. Under Doflamingo's control, the boulders, each weighing tens of tons, were lifted as if they were made of cotton. The two rocks collided midair, forming a large stone barrier in front of Doflamingo. The green crescent slash reached the barrier moments later, slicing the boulders in half, but the force of the attack had diminished. Doflamingo simply raised his hand and swatted away the remaining energy, shattering it into harmless fragments. However, the attack had achieved one thing: it had exposed Doflamingo, previously concealed among the debris, to Wood's view once more. Doflamingo was in a wretched state. Dust covered his face, and his body was riddled with cuts, his clothes soaked in blood. Upon closer inspection, one could see that many of his wounds had been stitched shut with threads, stopping the bleeding. His arms and legs, in particular, bore the signs of having been severed and then stitched back together with the string fruit's power, a grotesque form of self-surgery. Wood could barely contain his urge to mock Doflamingo. Is this guy channeling the wrong anime? Did that stitch-faced ninja from the other series wander into the wrong set? This guy's seriously turning himself into a patchwork monster. But after a moment's thought, Wood accepted the situation. After all, when Doflamingo fought that rubber kid, he even managed to stitch his internal organs back together with his devil fruit powers. So, merely stitching up a few cuts and playing patchwork monster didn't seem too far-fetched. Chapter 217, Awakening of Devil Fruit Power? Foo-fya-fa-foo. You didn't expect this, did you? Not only did I survive, But I've also gained even greater power. Doflamingo sneered, his voice echoing across the battlefield. As Wood hovered in the air, maintaining his altitude with moonwalk, Doflamingo pulled out another pair of flashy sunglasses from his pink feathered coat, replacing the ones that had been shattered. Who knew that the infamous Heavenly Yakshaw carried spare sunglasses? But what was worth noting was that even as Doflamingo swapped out his shades, Wood didn't catch a glimpse of his eyes. In the brief moment of Wood's distraction, Doflamingo had already put on his new sunglasses, crushing the broken pair underfoot with a confident smirk. With his new sunglasses in place, Doflamingo seemed to regain his composure and confidence, almost as if he had rediscovered his sense of superiority. It turns out the rumors among fans in his previous life were true. Doflamingo's sunglasses were his true essence. Moments earlier, Doflamingo had thought his death was certain, but a surge of overwhelming resentment and the anger of betrayal had fueled his will to survive. This intense hatred and fury had become the catalyst, pushing his devil fruit abilities into a new realm. A state known as awakening. Though Doflamingo wasn't entirely sure what had happened, one thing was clear: he could feel an enhanced mastery over his string fruit, his powers now responding to his will with even greater ease. As Doflamingo grew more accustomed to his newly awakened abilities, an increasing number of strings began to wind their way toward Wood. At first, they emerged from the ground, but soon even the plants and other objects around them were transformed into strings, all converging on Wood's position with lethal intent. Despite the serious injuries he had sustained, Doflamingo's confidence only grew. He believed that with his newfound strength, he could secure a dominant position in the underworld. The birdcage still enveloped all of Minion Island, and though Corazon and Law had fled, as long as the birdcage remained, no one could escape his grasp. All he needed to do was eliminate Wood, and the outcome of everything would remain unchanged. So, you awakened your devil fruit power in the face of death, huh? Seems like it's not just protagonists who are hard to deal with. Those famous villains get their own plot armor too. But do you really think you can beat me with your injuries and this newly awakened ability? Wood's voice was cold, calculating. If Wood had been facing another awakened devil fruit user, one whose abilities were unknown, he might have been more cautious. But Doflamingo's awakened powers were not unfamiliar to him. The ability to manipulate the environment and turn it into strings was certainly impressive, but a person's focus and control were limited. Doflamingo had only just awakened his power, and his proficiency was clearly lacking, as was the strength of his strings. Determined not to give Doflamingo any more time to adapt to his new abilities, Wood decided to end this quickly. He began removing the heavy equipment he had been wearing, letting it fall to the ground with a thud that kicked up a cloud of dust. At the same time, the runes on his chest, which had dimmed earlier, began to glow once more. With his weights discarded and the power of his divine heart amplifying his abilities, Wood's speed surged beyond supersonic. As Doflamingo commanded the white, wave-like mass of strings to crash down on Wood, he realized with shock that Wood had vanished from his sight in an instant. So what if you've awakened your devil fruit? While it's true that such an ability is rare and formidable on the seas, it doesn't make you invincible. As you said before, the world is vast, and right now, you're just a frog in a well. Wood's voice suddenly rang out right in front of Doflamingo, sending a jolt of fear through him. At the sight of Wood's reappearance, Doflamingo's hands slammed to the ground, summoning two massive, jagged waves of white strings that surged up to protect him. White shield. The waves of strings converged into two massive shields that rose between Wood and Doflamingo. Doflamingo didn't believe that Wood could slice through the dense mass of strings that made up his shield. Indeed, the white shield had the strength to withstand Wood's slashes. Even if Wood's attacks managed to break through, the remaining power would be too weakened to harm Doflamingo. However, Wood had never intended to cut through Doflamingo's defense head-on. His sudden appearance before Doflamingo was meant to demonstrate that, even with awakened powers, Doflamingo was still at a disadvantage. As the white shield shot up from the ground, Doflamingo was shocked to see Wood's figure vanish from in front of it. By the time Doflamingo's observation hockey detected Wood again, he had already reappeared behind him, swinging his blade down with deadly precision. While the awakening of the string fruit allowed Doflamingo to manipulate the environment and turn it into strings, even if he transformed everything around him into strings, controlling them would still take time. Though Doflamingo's mind could keep up with the speed of his thoughts, the strings themselves could not match the speed of Wood's movements. As Wood's sword struck Doflamingo's back, blood sprayed from the wound, adding to the injuries that already covered his body. But Doflamingo was nothing if not tenacious. Even as Wood's blade dug deep, nearly hitting vital organs, Doflamingo didn't let out a single cry of pain. Instead, he used his devil fruit powers to rapidly stitch the wound shut. As Wood's blade landed, a fountain of white strings erupted from the ground, quickly forming a large cocoon around Wood, intending to trap him. However, before the cocoon could fully enclose him, Wood sensed Doflamingo's intent. His twin blades flashed as he spun, tearing through the delicate walls of the string cocoon, shredding it into 1,000 strands that scattered into the air. Even if you can keep stitching your wounds closed, so what? Closing a wound doesn't mean you're healed. You might have incredible willpower, but if you lose enough blood, you'll die just like anyone else. Though Doflamingo was a formidable opponent, Wood knew that even the most powerful villains had limits. He continued to press his attack, determined to wear Doflamingo down physically while chipping away at his resolve with his words. He wouldn't give Doflamingo a chance to recover or pull off another miraculous comeback. Chapter 218, Doflamingo's Compromise. Wood, the Navy's traitor. Doflamingo began, his voice laced with both frustration and a grudging respect. I'll admit it. I underestimated you before. Or perhaps many on the Grand Line have underestimated you, thinking you were just a clown propped up by the Navy. In terms of personal strength, I'll concede that at this moment, I'm no match for you. But even if I lose this fight, the ultimate winner will still be me. It seemed Doflamingo had come to terms with the fact that, despite gaining new power, he still couldn't defeat Wood. Rather than continuing a futile offensive, he shifted his strategy, fully committing to defense. Of course, this defensive stance didn't mean Doflamingo was surrendering. Instead, he abandoned any thoughts of attacking Wood and focused entirely on fortifying his defenses. Doflamingo knew his strings couldn't keep up with Wood's speed in offensive capacity. They would only end up trailing behind, hitting nothing but air. However, when used defensively, his strings were more than sufficient. Even if his all-out defense couldn't entirely block Wood's attacks. Attacks that rivaled those of a master swordsman. Doflamingo knew it could buy him time. If this turned into a battle of attrition, he knew he would eventually lose, but it was also his only chance to force a stalemate. Wrapped in his white shield technique, forming a large spherical barrier around himself, Doflamingo glanced at the birdcage overhead. Wood immediately understood his plan. The birdcage was one of Doflamingo's strongest abilities, an impenetrable dome of razor-sharp threads that trapped everyone on the island while also severing any communication signals. Over time, the birdcage would gradually contract, forming a massive pillar of death. The threads that made up the birdcage were the toughest strings Doflamingo could produce, capable of slicing through buildings and even the ground itself. If it could cut through such sturdy materials, it would make short work of flesh and bone. Not even the strongest swordsman, armed with hockey-infused strikes, could break through the birdcage. The only way to escape its grasp was for Doflamingo himself to deactivate it or lose consciousness. Of course, maintaining such a powerful ability was extremely taxing, even for Doflamingo. Moreover, once the birdcage was deployed, he had no control over the speed at which it contracted. You think I'll be killed by the birdcage, even when you couldn't kill me yourself? Wood scoffed. He wasn't the least bit intimidated by the birdcage. If he were, he wouldn't have lured Doflamingo into this duel in the first place. The birdcage was part of Wood's plan all along. He knew that using a devil fruit ability drained the user's stamina, especially something as vast as the birdcage. Add to that Doflamingo's recently awakened power and his numerous injuries, and Wood was confident he could outlast him. Even if the birdcage shrank to its minimum size, Wood was certain he could endure it with a combination of his iron body technique and armament hockey. It would come down to a battle of endurance, a contest to see who would collapse first, Wood from the birdcage's pressure or Doflamingo from sheer exhaustion. I know killing you with the birdcage alone is unlikely, but it's more than enough to kill the others on this island. Doflamingo replied, his voice thick with malice. It became clear to me when you saved Rosinette and Law from my clutches earlier. They're more important to you than Diosperils ever was, aren't they? I don't know what other connection you have to them beyond being partners, but one thing's certain. You won't let my troublesome little brother and that brat Law die here, will you? As he manipulated the tide of white strings to block Wood's attacks, Doflamingo carefully studied Wood's expression. His earlier suspicions were just guesses, based on how desperately Wood had saved Rosinette and Law while ignoring Beryl's death. But now, seeing the hesitation flicker across Wood's face and the brief pause in his movements, Doflamingo knew he had struck a nerve. A wicked grin spread across Doflamingo's face, followed by a burst of manic laughter. So, Wood, what will it be? If we keep this up, we'll both end up battered and bruised, leaving the Navy and the world government to swoop in and claim victory. But perhaps it's time we talk, find a solution that benefits us both. Doflamingo wasn't against continuing this fight to the bitter end, but he wasn't foolish enough to ignore the reality of his situation. He knew his current state better than anyone. The birdcage might kill everyone else on the island, but it wouldn't kill Wood. And when it came down to just the two of them, with Doflamingo already heavily injured, a war of attrition would only end with his death. Doflamingo had always prided himself on being adaptable. Years ago, he had swallowed his pride to beg for his noble status back at Mary E. Jo's. Now, he could swallow his pride again and compromise with Wood. There would be plenty of opportunities for revenge later, but he only had one life. In the end, the one who laughed last was the true king. So you're trying to threaten me with Rosinant and Law's lives? But don't forget, Doflamingo, there are more people on this island than just the world government agents and Rosinant. Your Don Quixote family officers are here too. Wood countered, his voice as cold as steel. The birdcage doesn't discriminate, does it? Once it shrinks to its limit, your so-called family, those officers you hold so dear, won't survive either. Wood's words were calculated to cut deep. Doflamingo prided himself on his loyalty to his crew, often proclaiming that they were his true family. Now, Wood wanted to see just how much those words meant to him. Would Doflamingo risk their lives just to force a concession? Or would he relent, knowing that if the birdcage killed Rosinant and Law, it would also kill his most trusted allies? Chapter 219, If you steal my money, I'll stake my life. There's no denying it. My officers in the Don Quixote family are indeed important to me, and I do treat them as family. Doflamingo began, his voice calm but laced with cold resolve. But do you really think that if my own safety were at risk, I'd care about anyone else's life? You must have heard from Rosinant by now. How, over 10 years ago, I personally shot and killed my own father, severed his head, and brought it to Mary Ejos. A man like me. Do you really believe that when the time comes, I wouldn't discard my officers just as easily? Did Doflamingo value his officers in the Don Quixote family? Absolutely. Otherwise, men like Virgo and the others wouldn't have been drawn to him by his charisma. But to Doflamingo, his officers were also important tools, and even family could be discarded if they stood in the way of his survival. So Rosinant was right. Wood replied, his tone as sharp as his blade. You really are a complete and utter demon. I used to think that even pirates had a sense of justice. Justice of their own kind. But now, looking at you, it seems you lack even that. Doflamingo paused for a moment, surprised by Wood's words. Then he remembered that Wood had once been a Marine, though he had since betrayed them. Marines were always quick to talk about justice. Justice? That's just a convenient word used by the victors. Doflamingo sneered. This whole idea that pirates are evil, and Marines are justice. It's nonsense. Children who know nothing of peace and nothing of war have entirely different values. In the end, only those who stand at the top can decide what is right and wrong. You were once a Marine. A part of justice. But now you're a pirate, the evil you once fought against. Is it because of something you learned, something that showed you how narrow-minded that justice really was? Or did you discover a deeper truth, that true evil hides within what people call justice? Wood, you're strong. Even in a world full of powerful figures, your strength would earn you a place among the best. But you lack the ambition to be anything more than a loyal dog of the world government, like Garp. You'll never be a man who changes the world, like Roger. If Doflamingo were in Wood's position now, he wouldn't care about Rosinant or Law. He'd focus on killing everyone who stood in his way. To him, family and friends were nothing compared to his own life and dreams. Doflamingo did value his officers highly, even sacrificing other interests for their sake. But everything had a price. If the balance tipped, he wouldn't hesitate to let go of his so-called family. Earlier, Doflamingo had worried that Wood might be as ruthless as himself, but now he saw that he had overestimated his opponent. Wood had fought against the world government by attacking Anai's lobby and rejected deals with underworld brokers who wanted to sell mermaids. From these actions, Doflamingo knew Wood wasn't a man with the same ambitions as his own. So Doflamingo laughed. A loud, arrogant laugh. Because he realized he wasn't going to die today. You can have Rosinant and Law, but the 5 billion Baileys the world government brought must go to the Don Quixote family. Doflamingo demanded. The birdcage continued to contract, but neither Wood nor Doflamingo made a move to fight. Instead, they were engaged in a tense negotiation. Of course, both men kept their powers active. Wood's heart of God and Doflamingo's awakened devil fruit ability. Ready to strike if necessary. The battle had reached a stalemate. If Wood had no other concerns, he could likely kill Doflamingo, despite his newly awakened powers. But Doflamingo had exploited Wood's weakness. The birdcage, and the lives of Rosinant and Law. Wood's mission had 2 stages. First, ensure that Law consumed the Opop fruit, which was already accomplished. The second stage was to ensure that Law and Rosinant survived this conflict. Killing Doflamingo or continuing his multiverse life simulator journey. Between these 2 choices, Wood didn't hesitate to choose the latter. Killing Doflamingo wouldn't bring much benefit to Wood. At best, he might receive some lukewarm praise from Fleet Admiral Sengoku and a possible promotion in rank. But the multiverse life simulator represented endless possibilities, including the potential to grow even stronger. So, The choice was clear. No way. I've set my sights on that 5 billion Baileys, and if anyone tries to take it from me, I'll fight them to the death, Wood declared, his voice full of defiance. After the Anais Lobby incident, Wood had obtained the blueprints for the ancient weapon, Pluton. While he didn't intend to build the Doomsday weapon itself, he did plan to manufacture some of its powerful weapons. For that, he needed startup capital. Wood's crew wasn't like a traditional pirate crew. They didn't pillage islands or engage in random violence. Selling seafood wouldn't provide steady income. To grow stronger and expand, they needed a reliable source of revenue. If not for the mission, the 5 billion Baileys would have been Wood's primary focus. There was no way he was going to let go of that money. Doflamingo's expression darkened instantly. He felt like Wood was playing him for a fool again. To be fair, the opop fruit was worth far more than 5 billion Baileys, otherwise, the world government wouldn't have offered that much money for it. By letting Wood take Law, who had consumed the fruit, along with Rose in it, Doflamingo felt he was already being more than generous. This is a fair negotiation, not an extortion. Doflamingo snapped. You can have Rose in it and Law, but you can't expect to take the 5 billion Baileys too. Do you really think the Don Quixote family is going to walk away empty-handed? Wood's concern for Rosinante and Law's lives had forced him into this truce. It was clear that Wood intended to take both of them with him. But there was a problem. Law, now having eaten the opop fruit, was already worth 5 billion Baileys. If Wood wanted both Rosinante and Law, and the 5 billion Baileys on top of that, what would be left for Doflamingo? Chapter 220, Selling Law in one turn. There was no denying that Wood held more cards in this negotiation because of his overwhelming strength. However, Doflamingo was no pushover, nor someone who could be easily manipulated. If this so-called negotiation ended with Wood not planning to leave anything behind, then Doflamingo was more than willing to engage in a battle to the death. Mr. Doflamingo, there's no need to get agitated. When did I ever say that I was planning to take Trafalgar Law with me? Wood's words caught Doflamingo off guard, making him freeze for a moment. In all honesty, if given the choice between 5 billion Baileys and the Operation Fruit model, modification human, Doflamingo would undoubtedly choose the devil fruit. Baileys could be earned at any time, especially for someone like him who thrived in the underworld. However, the chance for immortality wasn't something one could encounter just anywhere. Doflamingo had previously believed that the only reason Wood had chosen to cooperate with someone like Dios Barrels was the potential for immortality offered by the Operation Fruit model, modification human. But now, Wood was telling him that he would give up Trafalgar Law, who had eaten the Operation Fruit model, modification human, in exchange for 5 billion Baileys. Are you sure you're not just toying with me? You're really willing to give up the chance at immortality for a measly 5 billion Baileys? Wood's original plan was to take Corazon and Law, while Doflamingo would receive the 5 billion Baileys from the world government. This arrangement wasn't even Doflamingo's lowest limit, as he still had room to negotiate with Wood. However, he had never expected that Wood would be so skilled at negotiating that he would reverse the bargaining table entirely. Law, who had consumed the Operation Fruit model, modification human, was worth far more than 5 billion Baileys. But what shocked Doflamingo was that despite holding the upper hand, Wood chose the Baileys over the opportunity for immortality. Wood's willingness to compromise so easily made Doflamingo suspect that he might be trying to deceive him. Perhaps tricking him into removing the birdcage first. 5 billion Baileys, measly you say? Do you know I once traveled the 4 seas just to get my hands on 100 million Baileys? Did you know I once had to share a cramped ship with a bunch of sweaty men because I couldn't afford to build my own ship? And do you know that our pirate crew once had to sell seafood because we were on the verge of starvation? Doflamingo was genuinely taken aback by Wood's words, so much so that he started to question whether he was hearing things correctly. The idea that a pirate with a 10 billion Baileys bounty, a man who had managed to outmaneuver him, had once been so desperate that he had to sell fish for a living was mind-boggling. Imagining this, Doflamingo couldn't help but feel that his own value was plummeting. He was Doflamingo, the new kingpin of the underworld, known as Joker. And yet, he had been bested by a man who used to sell fish. The thought of such information spreading was enough to make Doflamingo question whether he would still have a place in the underworld. In any case, I prefer the solid 5 billion Baileys over the unreliable promise of immortality. After all, people live in the present, and the future is too uncertain to bank on. Moreover, even if Trafalgar Law has eaten the Operation Fruit model, modification human, it will take time for him to develop the ability to grant immortality, right? The world government won't sit idly by knowing there's a boy who could potentially grant immortality. My pirate crew is still small, I don't want to be endlessly pursued by the world government because of Trafalgar Law. And if you still doubt my sincerity, I can help you get rid of the world government agents on this island first. Once the Don Quixote family's officers are free from the world government's interference, you won't have to worry about me reneging on our deal, will you? Currently, apart from Treble and Diamante, all of the Don Quixote family officers were on this island. Doflamingo acknowledged Wood's strength, but if he combined his power with that of the other officers, Wood's chances of victory would significantly decrease. So, Mr. Doflamingo, have you made your decision? I believe I've shown considerable sincerity. If you're still unsatisfied, then I suppose we'll have to settle this by force. However, I suspect that while the fish might die, this net of mine won't necessarily break. Had Wood shown enough sincerity? In truth, Wood had made so many concessions that Doflamingo began to wonder if Wood had some other ulterior motive. But with the terms now laid out, and unable to imagine a scenario where he and his officers could lose to Wood alone, Doflamingo eventually agreed to the terms. It seems you're not that interested in Trafalgar Law, who has eaten the Operation Fruit model, modification human. Does that mean the real reason you're willing to compromise is because of Rosinante? Now I'm even more curious. What exactly is the relationship between my traitorous brother and you? Doflamingo had initially been furious when Corazon betrayed him, but considering his brother's personality, he wasn't too surprised. What intrigued him now was Rosinante's identity and his connection to Wood. Clearly, it wasn't just a simple partnership. You don't have to keep probing. I can tell you clearly. Your brother, Rosinante, is a Marine undercover agent sent to infiltrate the Don Quixote family. The only reason I saved him is that he struck a deal with me. If I helped that brat Law obtain the Operation Fruit model, modification human, he agreed to gather intel on the Marines for me. After what happened, Doflamingo would undoubtedly dig into Rosinante's background. Given his influence in the underworld, it wouldn't take long to uncover Rosinante's identity as a Marine. So instead of trying to conceal the truth and risking unnecessary suspicion, Wood chose to reveal Rosinante's identity. This also indirectly explained why Wood was so intent on saving Rosinante. After all, finding a Marine undercover agent with some rank and standing wasn't an easy task. In terms of position and rank, Rosinante's status as a Marine commander was nothing compared to Virgo's rank as a Marine vice admiral. However, one mustn't forget that Rosinante was an undercover agent. His role wasn't just about gathering intelligence from the Marines, he could also send false information to the Marines to mislead them. Hearing Wood's explanation, Doflamingo's eyes narrowed behind his sunglasses. I take back what I said before. It seems you're also a man of ambition and vision. You're willing to exchange Operation Fruit model, modification human worth 5 billion Baileys for Rosinante. Do you really think he's worth that price? Chapter 221, Joining Forces, the targeted Cypher Pol agent organization. Whether he is worth it or not, I don't know. But what I do know is that I'm not losing out in this deal. After all, I've fulfilled my promise. Trafalgar Law, who ate the Operation Fruit model, modification human, has had his amber lead syndrome cured. There's no reason for me to play nanny for him for the rest of his life. Wood's reason for abandoning Trafalgar Law was simple. On one hand, he genuinely valued the 5 billion Baileys more than Law. On the other hand, Wood knew that even if Doflamingo took Law, who had the potential for immortality, it was unlikely that Doflamingo would be able to do anything significant with him. Wood's mission was only to ensure that Corazon and Law survived. As for anything beyond that, he wasn't interested in getting involved. This was the real world, not some anime, and to Wood, both Trafalgar Law and Corazon were just passing acquaintances. If he could help them, he didn't mind lending a hand, but if it conflicted with his own interests, Wood wouldn't hesitate to make a different choice. After all, he wasn't some kind of saint. After agreeing on the terms, Wood and Doflamingo, despite their obvious distrust of each other, headed to the prearranged meeting spot. The situation there, while not as intense as the battlefield between Wood and Doflamingo, was still quite fierce. The world government, understanding the importance of the Operation Fruit model, modification human, had sent a formidable force, strong enough to contend with the entire Don Quixote family. Unfortunately, no one had expected Virgo to be a double agent. Before the battle even began, he had already backstabbed several powerful Marine vice admirals on their side. The tragic deaths of these vice admirals significantly weakened the world government's fighting force. However, what puzzled everyone was why Doflamingo, the leader of the Don Quixote family, hadn't joined the battle but instead engaged in a fight with someone else elsewhere on the island. Judging by the aftermath of their battle, which could be felt even from a distance, whoever was fighting Doflamingo was undeniably strong. With Doflamingo's prolonged absence, the feelings of the Don Quixote family members and the world government agents were naturally different. The world government agents hoped that the mysterious figure would defeat Doflamingo, while the Don Quixote family members were deeply concerned for their leader's safety. It was clear to anyone that the Don Quixote family had been set up. The fact that their powerful leader hadn't immediately defeated his opponent suggested that the enemy had deliberately lured him into a trap. If not for the presence of the birdcage overhead, proving that Doflamingo was still relatively unharmed, Pika and the others would have rushed to his aid long ago. As the battle dragged on, both sides were waiting for a decisive moment. It was at this critical juncture that Doflamingo and Wood appeared together. Seeing Doflamingo filled the Don Quixote family members with joy and relief, while the expressions of the world government agents visibly darkened. Doflamingo, are you really going to turn against us? You should know very well that without the world government's support, you wouldn't have risen to your current position so quickly. Facing only the Don Quixote family's officers had already been a struggle for the world government agents. Now that Doflamingo had returned, they knew their chances of victory were slim. It wasn't just about losing the fight. The birdcage covering the entire island left them with no chance to escape, and the signal interference cut off all communication with the outside world. Unable to win the battle and with no means of escape, the world government agents could only resort to threats, trying to intimidate Doflamingo into backing down. But before Doflamingo could even respond, a figure suddenly flashed in front of the speaking Cypher Pol Zero agent. This Cypher Pol Zero agent, clearly a strong fighter, instinctively activated his most trusted defensive technique, Iron Body, upon sensing the danger. However, the reality was that under absolute power, the so-called Iron Body was utterly useless. A brilliant flash of a blade tore through the air, leaving a beautiful arc across the agent's throat. The Iron Body shattered instantly, and blood spurted out in torrents from the gaping wound. Despite being the closest to the Cypher Pol Zero agent, Wood's clothes remained spotless. The blood had been eerily absorbed by his cursed blade, Tenku. Spouting nonsense. Think about it, after all the planning the Don Quixote family has done, do you really believe they'd let you leave here alive? If you choose to die in battle now, at least you'll go out with some dignity. Although it was Wood who killed the agent, he did so under the banner of the Don Quixote family, which caused Doflamingo's expression to darken. However, he quickly brushed it off, reasoning that with no witnesses left alive, the blame would fall on Dios Barrels, not the Don Quixote family. Seeing Wood swiftly and efficiently eliminate a Cypher Pol Zero agent, Pika and the others glanced back at Doflamingo. With a nod from their leader, the other Don Quixote officers joined the fray alongside him. What had been a balanced battle quickly turned into a one-sided massacre with the addition of Wood and Doflamingo. As the fight progressed, Doflamingo observed Wood closely, finally dispelling any lingering doubts he had about him. Because of Rosinant's affiliation, Doflamingo had suspected that Wood might be connected to the Marines. But seeing Wood ruthlessly slaughter world government agents, even more so than his own men, Doflamingo dismissed those suspicions. The Marines were the world government's lapdogs. If Wood were really a Marine, he wouldn't be mercilessly butchering world government personnel like this. Moreover, considering everything Wood had done, offending both the Marines and the world government to the point of no return, Doflamingo simply couldn't envision Wood as a Marine. Of course, what Doflamingo could never imagine, even in his wildest dreams, was that Wood was indeed a Marine. Just not a conventional one. Wood harbored no affection for the world government. Killing Cypher Pol agents was something he did without hesitation, and he would have gladly welcomed more of them to slaughter. In fact, there were probably more Cypher Pol agents who had perished at Wood's hands than pirates. Chapter 222, The Conclusion and Making Off with the Spoils. The combined efforts of Wood and the Don Quixote family swiftly and decisively wiped out the world government forces on Minion Island. With the battle over, it was time for the much-anticipated division of the spoils. Just how much was 5 billion Baileys? Wood could say with full confidence. It was an enormous amount, so much so that even he would struggle to carry it all on his own. 1 billion Baileys could already fill a sizable suitcase if packed with the highest denomination of bills. So, 5 billion Baileys? That would require 50 such suitcases, and when stacked together, they could form a small wooden cabin. As Wood nonchalantly opened one suitcase after another, counting the crisp, fresh bills, Doflamingo couldn't help but feel a twinge of greed. Although he had amassed a fortune in the underground world over the years, 5 billion Baileys was still no small sum in his eyes. Currently, apart from Treble and Diamante, the other top members of the Don Quixote family were all present. If they were to gang up on Wood all at once, they might not be able to kill him, but they could likely force him to retreat. However, this idea quickly faded from Doflamingo's mind. The reason was simple: provoking a future major figure on the seas over 5 billion Baileys simply wasn't worth it. Moreover, Wood had agreed to the deal so readily. Considering the intelligence Wood had shown in his previous schemes against the Don Quixote family, it was unlikely that he hadn't prepared some sort of backup plan. After a brief moment of hesitation, Doflamingo suppressed his desire to make a move, signaling to Pika and the others to stand down. The Don Quixote family members were confused by their leader's decision. Hadn't they gone through all this trouble, risking conflict with the world government, to obtain the Operation Fruit model, modification human and the 5 billion Baileys? And now, here was a rookie pirate who hadn't even been in the game for 2 years, blatantly taking their loot right in front of them, and their young master was just letting it happen? As agreed, you can take the 5 billion Baileys, but Trafalgar Law stays. Doflamingo said, forcibly tearing his gaze from the money and fixing it on Wood, trying to alleviate the pain of parting with such a sum. Your birdcage is still up, and apart from Rosinante and Law, the only people left on the island are your Don Quixote family members. I don't think you need my help to find them, do you? Rather than having his subordinates search for Corazon and Law, Doflamingo opted to wait in the center of the shrinking birdcage. While sending out his men to search might have been an option, Doflamingo was wary that it could be another one of Wood's traps. After the previous battle, Doflamingo had decided that being alone with Wood was too unsettling. If his men were sent out in smaller groups and then picked off one by Wood, it would be disastrous. As time passed, the birdcage continued to shrink, limiting the area in which anyone could move. Corazon's Com Fruit model, soundless human devil fruit, Com Fruit, made him practically unbeatable in a game of hide-and-seek, as it allowed him to completely erase all sounds. Even the most powerful individuals wouldn't notice his presence if they weren't paying close attention. However, no matter how well Corazon could hide, the shrinking space meant that it was only a matter of time before he was found. With no way to break through the birdcage, it was inevitable that Corazon and Law would eventually be discovered. When Pika finally dragged both Corazon and Law before Doflamingo, the gathered Don Quixote family members all glared at Corazon with murderous intent. Just as Doflamingo valued the Don Quixote family members, they deeply revered and trusted their young master. Corazon's betrayal was something they could not tolerate. As soon as Pika dropped Corazon to the ground, Virgo, one of the top officers of the Don Quixote family, disappeared from sight with a swift instant transmission. In the next instant, Virgo reappeared in front of Corazon, wielding a bamboo staff coated in armament hockey, aiming to pierce Corazon's skull. Corazon was the code name for the heart seat in the Don Quixote family. Virgo had been the original Corazon, while Rosinante was the second. Virgo couldn't tolerate the fact that his former heart had turned traitor. Thus, without waiting for Doflamingo's orders, Virgo took it upon himself to eliminate the betrayer. However, as fast as Virgo was, someone was faster. Just as Virgo, also known as the Demon Bamboo, was about to drive his hockey-coated bamboo staff through Rosinante's head, a powerful force suddenly slammed into Virgo's chest, sending him flying. Virgo's armament hockey was indeed formidable. He was one of the few capable of coating his entire body with it. But despite activating his hockey at the last moment, Virgo couldn't avoid being kicked several kilometers away, coughing up blood as he struggled to his feet. Rosinante is one of my spoils of war. This was agreed upon by your young master and me. You want to touch what's mine? Did you ask my permission? As Wood suddenly made his move, the other members of the Don Quixote family quickly surrounded him. Doflamingo, veins bulging on his forehead, restrained his fury and held back his subordinates. Virgo was among the strongest of the Don Quixote officers. Although Wood had the element of surprise, the fact that he could kick Virgo with such force that the man coughed up blood was proof enough that if they fought, the average officer in the Don Quixote family would stand no chance against Wood. Doflamingo, it seems your men aren't too friendly toward me. Or are they simply not taking you seriously? We had an agreement. Are you planning to go back on your word? Since forming the Don Quixote family, Doflamingo had never been so humiliated in front of his officers. But unsure of what Wood might do, Doflamingo could only channel his anger into a harsh response. Enough. I'll release the birdcage. You can take Rosinante and the 5 billion Baileys and get out of here. But Trafalgar Law stays. Hearing Doflamingo's words, Rosinante looked shocked, just as he was about to speak, but his vision suddenly went black as Wood knocked him out with a single chop to the neck. Chapter 223, Wood's unconsciousness and Rosinante's suspicious position with the birdcage lifted. Communication devices were back in operation, allowing Wood to summon Ruth and the others via transponder snail. During the days Wood was missing, Ruth and the crew were deeply anxious. Robin, in particular, was so distraught that she almost forgot her usual routine of reading. She was restless, unable to focus on anything. If Wood hadn't left behind his Vivre card, Robin might have believed that she had been abandoned once again. When Ruth and the crew followed Wood's instructions and brought the Dark Pill to Minion Island, they were greeted by the sight of Wood standing on the shore, waiting for them, surrounded by numerous large crates. As soon as they docked, Robin couldn't contain her urgency and rushed off the ship, immediately inspecting Wood's condition. Judging by his tattered clothes and the numerous wounds on his skin, it was clear that Wood had once again gone off on his own to do something dangerous. Wood. You promised me before we parted that you wouldn't do anything dangerous. So why have you ended up like this again? Robin had initially intended to scold Wood with the stern demeanor of a concerned caretaker. However, before she could finish her sentence, Wood's body suddenly collapsed into her arms. It took her a moment to realize that the figure who had just been smiling at them moments ago had now lost consciousness. Panicking, Robin quickly urged Ruth and the others to load everything onto the ship and get away from the island as quickly as possible. There was a good reason Wood hadn't fully confronted the Don Quixote family. He knew his condition better than anyone. Doflamingo's sudden devil fruit awakening had caught him completely off guard. The power of the heart of the gods was indeed formidable, but it came with a significant cost. Continuing to fight Doflamingo might have led to an uncertain outcome for either of them. So, to maximize his gains, Wood agreed to the negotiation with Doflamingo. During the battle with the world government's forces, Wood made sure to put on an impressive show of overwhelming power. But in reality, by the time Wood had kicked Virgo away, he was already running on empty. His outward bravado was nothing more than an act, designed to make Doflamingo believe that Wood had an unshakable confidence, preventing him from making any rash moves. However, once Robin arrived and Wood's mind relaxed, he could no longer maintain his composure and collapsed directly into her arms. The heart of the gods drained his life force, and excessive use of this power inevitably led to extreme fatigue afterward. Wood's unconscious state lasted nearly an entire day. An unusually long time in a world where even ordinary people often displayed extraordinary physical resilience. When Wood passed out, the first thing Robin did was strip off his clothes. Not out of any impropriety, but to check for any severe injuries. After cleaning all of Wood's wounds, Robin found no serious or life-threatening injuries on him. The only strange thing she noticed was a set of unfamiliar symbols on his chest. Robin, who had grown up in O'Hara and was knowledgeable in many languages and scripts, was puzzled by the mysterious runes on Wood's chest. Something she had never seen before. The crew had no dedicated doctor on board, and while Ruth and the others knew basic first aid, they were at a loss seeing Wood breathing steadily yet remaining unconscious. This left Robin deeply worried. Just as Robin and the crew were preparing to head back to the first half of the Grand Line, aiming for the renowned medical nation of Drum Island to seek treatment for Wood, Rosinante, who had been brought back to the ship with them, regained consciousness first. Strictly speaking, he could no longer be called Corazon, as he had been expelled from the Don Quixote family. Now, he was simply Rosinante. Robin and the others had seen the crates Wood had brought back. When they opened them, they were utterly shocked to find each one packed with money. 5 billion Baileys in total. 5 billion Baileys in today's economy, long before any inflation set in, was enough to buy a small kingdom. Robin had no idea where Wood had acquired such a fortune, but it was clear that Rosinante, found alongside the money, must have been involved. This suspicion put Rosinante in a difficult position. Since they couldn't be sure whether he was friend or foe, Rosinante was shackled with sea-stone cuffs and subjected to Robin's interrogation. Why did Ruth and the crew have sea-stone cuffs? They had found them on the warship they had seized earlier. Considering the warship had once guarded Impel down, it wasn't surprising that it would carry a few pairs of sea-stone restraints. Who are you, really? What's your relationship with our captain, Wood? What happened on the island? And why is Wood still unconscious? After being knocked out by Wood, Rosinante had been searching for Law as soon as he woke up, only to realize in shock that he was no longer on Minion Island but adrift on the open sea. Faced with Robin's barrage of questions, Rosinante could only repeat what he had said before. My name is Rosinante, and I'm a partner of Captain Wood. We encountered another pirate crew on the island. As for why Captain Wood is unconscious, I really have no idea. Having been undercover for many years, Rosinante could tell right away that Robin and the others weren't in the know. So he had no intention of revealing Wood's identity as a marine spy. As for the events on the Minion Island, they were far too complex to explain, so Rosinante decided to keep his answers vague. Ruth and the others had worked at Impel Down before, so they had witnessed plenty of interrogation techniques. However, Rosinante's claim of being Wood's friend complicated matters. They were wary of going too far, fearing they might accidentally kill the weakened, sea-stone restrained Rosinante. After watching Ruth and the others interrogate Rosinante for a long time without getting any clear answers, and with Wood's continued unconsciousness causing her increasing concern, Robin decided to step in and take over the questioning. At first, neither Ruth nor Rosinante took Robin's interrogation seriously. After all, she was young, and with her harmless appearance, she seemed far less intimidating than the burly men of the crew. Chapter 224, Robin's Interrogation Methods That Strike Fear in Men. It didn't take long for Robin to prove that the saying "don't judge a book by its cover" holds a lot of truth. Twofold fleur, guillotine. Medical research suggests that human pain can be classified into 10 levels. The first level is akin to the sensation of a mosquito bite, while the 10th level is the intense pain experienced during childbirth. At this moment, Rosinant was enduring pain equivalent to the 10th level. His agonized screams echoed throughout the entire dark pill too, and the sheer intensity of the pain had twisted his face into a grotesque mask of suffering. His tears and snot had mixed into an indistinguishable mess. Even as she witnessed Rosinant stubbornly refuse to give in despite the excruciating torture, Robin was just about to intensify her efforts with a fourfold floor when Ruth and the others quickly intervened. Robin-chan, you need to stop. If you keep this up, you're really going to kill him. Yeah, I think it's not that he doesn't want to talk, but that he physically can't talk right now. One of the crew members pointed at Rosinant, urging Robin to calm down while indicating she should take a closer look at him. It was only when Robin, in her frustration, glanced at Rosinant again that she realized he had already passed out, foaming at the mouth. Damn it. After all that, we still didn't get any answers. When he wakes up, I'm going to interrogate him even more rigorously. From his expressions earlier, it's clear he knows something about Wood's condition, but he just won't say it. Wood had been unconscious for a whole day, and Robin was becoming increasingly desperate, nearly losing her composure. Although they were currently heading to Drum Island, known for its medical expertise, Robin was determined to find out why Wood had lost consciousness before they arrived. More interrogation? Maybe we should handle it instead, Robin. You can focus on taking care of the captain. Hearing that Robin planned to continue the interrogation and possibly make it even more intense, Ruth and the others couldn't help but feel a bit of sympathy for the man before them. They knew well that Robin's flower fruit model, replicate human devil fruit powers, could easily snap a person's bones. This wasn't just an interrogation. It was downright torture. They had underestimated Robin before, but now they realized that even though she was a young girl, she was still a woman. And when a woman becomes ruthless, it's a whole different level of danger. No. Uncle Ruth, your interrogation methods are too gentle. We won't get anything useful that way. Wood is still unconscious, and we need to find out what's wrong with him as soon as possible. Robin's tone was unusually firm, leaving no room for argument. As she spoke, she kept glancing at Ruth and the others, making them feel a chill down their spines. Buddy, if you know anything about our captain's condition, you'd better spill it now, or else your future might not look so bright. This isn't just about anything. It's about our captain, and Robin won't show any mercy. To her, our captain is someone very special. As Robin turned and walked back to the cabin to care for the unconscious Wood, Ruth quickly helped the barely conscious Rosinant to his feet, urging him to tell them the truth. I really am a partner of your Captain Wood. The one who fought your captain earlier was Heavenly Yaksha Doflamingo. The world government planned to buy a rare devil fruit from pirates, and Doflamingo intended to double-cross them. But I secretly cooperated with your captain, and we managed to outmaneuver Doflamingo and the Don Quixote family. As for the rest, I truly don't know. I have no idea why our captain has fallen unconscious. Rosinant, who had finally come to, felt nothing but numbness below the waist. When he looked at Robin again, his eyes were filled with sheer terror. He had always thought his brother, Doflamingo, was the true devil, but now his view had changed. This seemingly harmless black-haired girl was the real devil. After all, the title of Demon Child wasn't just given out randomly. There was a reason for it. Rosinant had tried to stay strong, but when he heard that Robin was planning a second round of interrogation, even more intense than the first, he finally broke down. Over the next few minutes, Rosinant spilled almost everything that had happened on Minion Island, leaving out only the fact that he and Wood were marine spies. He had no other choice. He wanted to be tough, but he just couldn't stay strong in the face of this devilish girl. So, Wood fell unconscious after fighting Doflamingo? Does Heavenly Yaksha Doflamingo's devil fruit have such an ability? What should we do now to wake Wood up? After hearing about everything Wood had done on Minion Island, Robin and the crew were momentarily stunned. They hadn't expected so much to have happened in just the few days since Wood left. I spent a long time in the Don Quixote family, and I know Doflamingo is a devil fruit user. But his fruit is the Paramsha type string fruit model, thread human devil fruit, which shouldn't have the power to cause someone to fall unconscious. Rosinant explained, sharing what he knew. However, halfway through his explanation, he noticed that Robin's expression had turned dark, clearly dissatisfied with his lack of useful information. To avoid another round of torture, Rosinant quickly shared a hypothesis. Could it be that Captain Wood is unconscious because he was poisoned or something? Doflamingo is ruthless and cunning, and it wouldn't be out of character for him to resort to such underhanded tactics if he felt he was outmatched. Rosinant had no other choice. He could only offer his best guess since he was just as puzzled about Wood's condition. Wood's unconsciousness was troubling for Rosinant as well. Not only did he have several questions for Wood, but he was also uncertain if he would even survive the journey if Wood didn't wake up soon. Moreover, Rosinant's theory wasn't entirely baseless. As a former officer of the Don Quixote family, he had heard that Doflamingo had been secretly funding a certain scientist. One who is supposedly an expert in toxic substances. Chapter 225, The Wood Pirate Crew targeted by numerous forces. Rosinant's words finally earned him some trust from Robin and Ruth's crew. After all, the events on Minion Island that he described made sense, and it didn't seem like he was making anything up. Since Rosinant had played the role of Wood's partner, that meant he was a friend, not an enemy. However, until Wood woke up, Robin and the others remained cautious. While they ceased torturing Rosinant, they did not remove the sea stone shackles that bound him. 2 days passed, during which the Dark Pill's helm was turned, steering them toward Drum Island in the first half of the Grand Line.